Welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Micheal Gregor coming to you live from my treadmill for this emergency webinar. We have 5,000 people registered, which is where Zoom caps us off, unfortunately. But that means it will take a few moments for everyone to kind of get settled. Let me just start with some housekeeping logistics. If you can't hear me right now, there are instructions in the email that was sent to tweak your audio settings. But if you can't hear me, then you couldn't hear me just say that. So let me paste that into the chat box. If at any time you run into technical difficulties, there are some live chat Zoom staff standing by. Let me paste that link. All right, and if they're unable to help, we have nutritionfacts.org staff standing by too, though presumably if Zoom can't help, I don't know what we can do. But we always want to give you as many options as possible. So let me paste that into the chat box as well. Please reserve the Q&A button you'll see in the Zoom window there to ask content questions. I'll definitely be doing some Q&A at the end, but you don't have to wait until the end to ask your questions. Feel free to add your questions for the Q&A throughout the webinar, and we will have Nutrition Facts team compiling them to be answered at the end. And I will paste that instruction into the chat box as well. You may want to wait to see if your topic will be covered later on before asking questions. So let me show you the topics that I'm going to cover today. Okay, here we go. All right. I'll actually paste this as well into the Zoom, into the chat box, so you can follow along later. Oh, my chat box just disappeared. Let me bring that back up. Chat box. Chat box. All right. Okay. So I just put that in as well. Sorry about that weird spacing. Okay, so as you will see, I'll address first where this disease came from in the first place. Without an understanding of that, we won't be able to prevent future occurrences. So I'll go through the last two deadly coronavirus outbreaks, MERS and SARS, and the origin story as we know it so far for this new coronavirus. Then I'll switch to, who cares where it came from? It's here now. What are we going to do about it? So I'll talk about how we successfully beat back SARS, why that's more difficult with COVID-19, and what we have to do instead to slow the epidemic, slow the pandemic in the year or so we have before there's any hope of a vaccine. Then I'll go through what COVID-19 is looking like clinically, if you get it, along with a sidebar discussion on the controversy around ACE inhibitor drugs and ibuprofen. Then I'll move on to the best way to treat COVID-19 with a little sidebar on whether zinc lozenges may help. Not surprisingly, given our lack of good antiviral drugs, I'll continue by saying the best way to treat it is to not get it in the first place. So I'll talk about how to avoid the virus, then how to inactivate the virus. But if you do get it, how can you treat yourself at home? I'll talk about the use of surgical masks, face coverings, and then a sidebar on so-called N95 respirators. And in that section, with a discussion on where the pandemic is likely to go from here. I'll then end my prepared materials with the most important discussion of all, the concept that as terrible as this pandemic is, there are much greater pandemic threats on the horizon, and most importantly, what we can do about them. The best way to how not to die in a pandemic is to not have the pandemic in the first place. All right. Okay, the webinar was, excuse me, today. And when I'm not actually coughing, don't anybody get worried. I'm just speaking loudly for this microphone, which isn't the best. So I'll just have to, so I may clear my throat a little bit. But the webinar was originally scheduled for 2 hours. But it turns out there's just so much material. I think we're actually going to go more like 3 hours today. I know Passover's starting tonight for many of us. What a time for a plague-themed holiday. Look, if you can't stay, don't worry. We're going to send you a recording. Everybody who registered will get a full recording. I just didn't realize how much science there was going to be out there. So I apologize that we're going to go about an hour over. And in fact, we're probably going to set up an entire new webinar next month, another 3 hours to update everybody on everything, on the latest. Okay, but we will be taking 5-minute breaks on the hour. So at 3 p.m. Eastern and then at 4 p.m. in hopes of being wrapped up by 5. And so I'm going to paste those 2 break times into the chat box. So you'll have them. So look, if you have to pee and it's 2:55, if you can just hold it for 5 minutes, you won't have to miss anything. All right, let me just check in with staff here to see if there's any major onboarding problems. And just to make sure everybody got on okay. Wow, it looks like there's already nearly 100 questions in the Q&A box, which is great, which is fine. We will certainly get to them. Let me just see how everything's doing. Okay, it looks like we are good. We are nearing our 5,000 mark. That's where we are trying to go to here. Just while I see the number of participants keeps increasing. So I'll before I dive right in, just kind of a little background of how this webinar came into being. You know, people, when I announced this webinar about a month ago, people were like, April? Why so long? I mean, we didn't need this information on surviving a pandemic now, to which I would say, I told you 14 years ago, right? I mean, people think How Not to Die is my first book, but it's actually my 4th. Before I started nutritionfacts.org, I had a career as public health director at HSUS in Washington, D.C., specializing on emerging infectious diseases. That's how I ended up defending Oprah and getting on the Colbert Report and, testifying before Congress. And I wrote a book on pandemic preparedness and prevention back in 2006, and I had a whole pandemic planning checklist for families. It was like the Daily Dozen, but with pandemic prep, right? Have your masks ready, the gloves, the hand sanitizer, the food, the toilet paper. I had it all in the list. Of course, look, back then, few people were thinking about pandemics. Few people were paying attention to the threat, but finally, I am glad that all that past expertise I can bring to the foray now. Okay, but then why did it take me a month to set up this webinar? Well, it's because I know people rely on me to not just, hear about the latest headlines, right, but do that deep dive into the science, right, to cut through all the prevailing noise and nonsense. And I had about a decade of science to catch up on, right? There's about 5,000 papers on human coronaviruses. And over the last month, there's been about 200 new papers and preprints published every single day, right? So just keeping up on the latest, that's a full-time job just in and of itself. Forget about all the past thousands of papers, right? But I knew that you expected no less of me. And so I did it. And now let's do it. For those of you new to my webinars, there's no need to worry about taking notes or anything. After the webinar is over, we're going to send you a full recording of it so you can watch it and pause it as many times as you want. Now, normally my webinars are filled with these beautiful polished videos, sneak previews of what's going to come on nutritionfacts.org. And I am. going to do a whole month-long series of videos on COVID-19. But they're not done yet. I was kind of preparing for some webinar. Anyway, in fact, look, I don't even know how I'm going to even record them. So we might actually have to go back to the, kind of old school style of just, showing the scientific papers with me kind of narrating over it. But all that month-long content I'm going to present right now, right here. Let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at, if you look at the outline here, first on the list, where did the COVID-19 pandemic come from? Okay, well, it was December 30th, 2019, New Year's Eve's Eve, when Dr. Li Wenliang, an ophthalmologist at the Wuhan Central Hospital in the Hubei province of China, messaged his fellow physicians, alerting them to the appearance of a concerning cluster of pneumonia cases. In response, he was summoned to the Public Security Bureau and reprimanded for spreading rumors and making false statements that disturbed the public order. 39 days later, after becoming infected with the very virus he tried to warn his colleagues about, he was dead at age 33. And by that time, the disease had already spread to dozens of countries. You'll all be happy to know I am currently writing a book on pandemic prevention and survival, and I'm going to dedicate that book to Dr. Li. His initial message read, 7 SARS cases confirmed at Huanan Seafood Market. SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, which 17 years earlier had been the first deadly global outbreak triggered by a coronavirus. Sadly, the doctor who first alerted the world to that epidemic, Carlo Urbani, also succumbed to the disease. Coronaviruses are named for their crown-like appearance under the electron microscope, from the Latin corona, for crown, as in coronation, due to the fringe of spike proteins that radiate from its surface. I'm sure you've seen all those kind of graphical representations and fake colorized versions, but here is what they actually look like. Okay, this is under an electron microscope. You can see that halo of spikes. Now, these are actually chicken coronaviruses, which cause a disease called avian infectious bronchitis, but all the coronaviruses kind of look similar. Before the outbreak of SARS in 2002, only 2 coronaviruses were known to cause disease in humans, and both caused little more than the common cold. But the SARS coronavirus went on to kill about 1 in 10 people infected, a 10% mortality rate. A decade later, in 2012, another deadly coronavirus emerged, MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus. Like SARS, MERS spread to infect thousands of people across dozens of countries, but this time 1 in 3 died, more than a 30% mortality rate. Emerged from where? Where do emerging infectious diseases emerge from? All human viral infections are believed to originate in animals. In the cases of coronaviruses, most human coronaviruses appear to have arisen originally in bats. The reason bats make such good viral hosts is that up to 200,000 of them can crowd together in dense roosting colonies, and they can fly more than 1,000 miles, acquiring and spreading new viral strains. Their unique navigational tool, echolocation, may even facilitate bat-to-bat transmission by spraying out respiratory secretions every time they shriek to, look for mosquitoes. But people aren't getting the disease directly from bats. Bats are considered the primordial host, the gene pool from which genetic fragments of coronaviruses can kind of mix and match. Breaching the species barrier to infect humans appears to necessitate intermediate hosts in whom coronaviruses can adapt, amplify, and access human populations. In the case of MERS, the intermediate hosts were found to be camels. A bat in Saudi Arabia was found carrying the MERS coronavirus, but its contact with the bodily fluids of infected camels, particularly their nasal secretions, that is considered the major risk factor for human infection. Once camels infect people, then MERS can then go spread human to human. Now, of course, those in the cattle business denied the link between MERS and camel exposure. In fact, in response to the warnings that those in close contact with camels wear personal protective equipment at all times, in response to that dire warning from authorities, they launched with a social media campaign entitled, and I'm not making this up, "Kiss Your Camel." But wait, we domesticated camels 3,000 years ago. What happened to turn camel slobber into a potential kiss of death? Well, archived samples of camel blood show MERS had been long circulating in them for decades before spilling over into human populations. So why now? Well, camels used to be allowed to forage outdoors, right? But as more and more camels were raised, desertification from overgrazing forced the industry to transition to thousands of camel farms using these enclosed high-density housing systems where they were confined indoors. And the high-intensity contact between the camels alongside their workers is thought to be what helped drive the spillover of the MERS coronavirus from camels to humans. By 2011, open grazing was completely banned in Qatar, the Middle Eastern country with the highest camel density, and the next year, the first human cases of MERS were reported. Before MERS, though, there was SARS, the first new global disease outbreak of the 21st century. The preponderance of first cases of the SARS coronavirus, abbreviated SARS-CoV, were found in the same kind of place where most of the first cases of our current pandemic, caused by the COVID-19 coronavirus, which we called SARS-CoV-2, they both were found. Both of the first human cases of both SARS and COVID-19 have been traced to live animal wet markets in China. See, freshly slaughtered animals are thought to be more nutritious by many regional consumers there, and some seek yewe, which is kind of translates to wild taste, believing that the consumption of exotic animals bestows benefits to health and social status. This convergence, so the fresh slaughter with exotic animals, leads to this perfect storm for zoonotic, meaning animal to human disease transmission, because you have these crowded cages in those wet marks, which are contaminated with blood, urine, feces of countless species mixed together in a potential cauldron of contagion. There was a vast expansion of the wildlife trade in the 1990s to supply the emerging urban middle class demand. Many of the wild animals, typically while still alive, enter China through Vietnam, from Laos, where the wildlife meat trade rose to become the second largest income source for rural families. Studies that a single Laotian market estimated the sale of between 8,000 to 10,000 of at least 23 species of mammals, 6,000 to 7,000 of more than 33 types of birds, and 3,000 to 4,000 reptiles, for a total weight exceeding 36 tons of animals at a single market. Then, as demand surpassed supply still, the country-to-country wildlife trade was supplemented with the creation of intensive captive production farms where wild animals were often raised under poor sanitation and often unnatural stocking densities before being transported and caged at markets for sale. 6 million people in China are involved in the wildlife farming industry, valued at $18 billion. The genetic building blocks for the SARS virus have since been identified from 11 different strains of coronaviruses found in Chinese bats. But there are bat-borne coronaviruses all around the world. The reason China, in particular, has been ground zero for these multiple jumps of deadly coronavirus epidemics may be because of these wet markets. In the case of SARS, the intermediate host appeared to be the masked palm civet, a cat-like creature prized for its meat. Here's what the little guys look like. There they are. In addition to being raised for their flesh, civet cat penis is soaked in rice wine for use as an aphrodisiac. And these animals also produce the most expensive coffee in the world. So-called fox dung coffee is produced by feeding coffee beans to captive civets, and then, you guessed it, recovering the partially digested beans from the feces. I don't know if you can see that, but those are actual civet turds right there. A musk-like substance of buttery consistency secreted by the anal glands is said to give the coffee its characteristic flavor and smell. One might say this unique drink is good to the last dropping, of course. Okay. Coronaviruses acquired from civets in the affected market were almost identical to the SARS virus, while civets at wildlife farms supplying the live markets were found to be largely free from infection. Up to 80% of sampled civets at the markets themselves showed evidence of exposure. This suggests that most infections happened at the market, perhaps due to a combination of this crowded interspecies mixing, as well as the immunosuppressive effects of stress. These live animal markets not only allow for cross-species transmission and human exposure, but also, and viral amplification, but also viral modification. Apparently, civets weren't just passive conduits for the virus. They appear to be incubators for human adapting mutations to the virus itself. The virus uses its corona of spikes, like a key in a lock, to latch onto host receptors to gain entry into the victim's cells. To switch from infecting one species to another, the genes that code for the spikes have to mutate to fit the spike into the new host's receptors, right? A new lock requires a new key. Both SARS-CoV, the virus that causes SARS, and SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, attached to a specific enzyme coating the cells of our lungs. By the time a mishmash of bat coronaviruses made its way into civets, the docking spikes of the virus were only 2 mutations away from locking in the configuration that bound to human receptors. And then the human-to-human SARS epidemic was born. After the initial SARS outbreak ended in 2003, there were 4 additional new human cases confirmed in China. Unlike the previous cases, the 4 individuals had not had close contact with infected persons, and they presented only with mild symptoms. Well, viruses sampled from palm civets at both the local market and the restaurant where 3 out of the 4 of those people had eaten were found to be nearly identical to those discovered in the new milder human cases. The new civet viruses shared only one of the 2 civet-to-human mutations of the spikes found in all the new human patients, but none of the previous year's civet coronaviruses, right? These findings suggest that the intermediate host can help transform coronaviruses from the primordial reservoir in rats to adapt them to greater human infectivity. Yes, Bats are trapped for meat in Asia. Most bat hunters do report getting bitten. Yes, the handling and consumption of undercooked bat meat is still practiced in China, Guam, other parts of Asia, but it appears intermediate hosts may be needed as a stepping stone for bat coronaviruses to trigger a human pandemic. And it's hard to imagine a system that could be better designed to kind of trip that kill switch than a live animal wet market. In response to the SARS outbreak, the Chinese government implemented strict controls over the wildlife market, including a ban on the sale of civet cats. Within months, though, the ban was lifted and trade resumed as before. Had authorities in China learned its lesson from SARS and enacted a permanent ban on live animal markets, it's possible humanity would not now be suffering the worst pandemic in a century. That's why I wanted to talk about SARS, because it gives some context for the emergence of COVID-19, right? We can now understand how Dr. Lee's 7 SARS cases confirmed at Huanan seafood market, that forewarning, why it was so ominous, right? Now, it wasn't the SARS coronavirus, though, but instead a virus that would come to be known as SARS coronavirus 2, the cause of COVID-19, short for coronavirus disease 2019. Before it became known as SARS-CoV-2, though, it was just the Wuhan seafood market pneumonia virus. According to the director of the Chinese CDC, ground zero for the COVID-19 pandemic was the Huanan market in Wuhan, China, where most of the first human cases were traced back to. Described as the largest wholesale seafood market in central China, the Huanan market reportedly also sold 75 species of wild animals. Now, if you want to see what that part of the market looked like, you can go to bit.ly/Huanan market, and I'm going to paste that URL into the chat box if you are interested. I'm actually going to go to that website now to show you a few pictures, but I want to warn those who are sensitive to images of animal suffering and slaughter. They may want to look away from the screen, and then I will tell you when those images are gone. So I'm going to switch over to show those now, and I will tell you when I am done showing them. Okay, so these are pictures taken from that very market, which is implicated in the emergence of the current pandemic. That looks like a sun bear. I'm not sure what these animals are, some kind of little deer. These look like monkeys, maybe like a groundhog there. These are all different animals raised for meat. Porcupine, look like pheasants, and it just gets worse from there. All right, I am going to stop sharing that now. Okay, we are back. No more grisly pictures. Okay, so although there are fish coronaviruses, 90% of the samples that turned up positive for the virus were found in the wildlife section of the 500,000 square foot seafood market that traffic these exotic animals for food. That's where the area where those photos were taken. The fact that the genetic sequences of the viruses obtained from some of the early human victims were 99.98% identical, despite the rapid mutation rate of coronaviruses, suggests that the current pandemic originated within a very short time span from a single source. And although there have been documented reports of the original SARS coronavirus escaping from laboratories, the fact that the COVID-19 coronavirus was optimized for binding to human cells in a novel way that we didn't know before suggests that the new pandemic that we now face is a product of natural selection rather than some kind of purposefully manipulated laboratory creation. The new coronavirus appears to be appears to have a common ancestor with the original SARS virus, about 80% identical to the original SARS virus, but more than 95% identical with a coronavirus found in a bat in 2013. So the current thinking is that the COVID-19 virus originated in bats, but then jumped to humans only after passing through an intermediate host. This pandemic emerged in the winter. After all, most bat species in Wuhan are actually hibernating at this point, and no bats were reportedly found at the Hunan market themselves. Now, but the virus was found in environmental samples taken from the market, like from surfaces, but the market was evidently closed and cleared before the animals themselves were tested, which kind of complicates the forensic search for the source. But the leading candidate for the stepping stone civet of the current outbreak is the pangolin. And I've got to show you a picture of these puppies. It's a nice picture, not a bad picture. Here, let me get back over here. Okay, back to Poopy Coffee. All right, check this out. That is a pangolin. Isn't that crazy? Also known as a scaly anteater, pangolins look like a cross between a sloth and a pine cone. That's how I would describe them. Oh, and are you ready for this? The babies ride around on their moms. Check this out. This is adorable. Yeah, okay. But between the demand for their meat as a delicacy and their scales for use in traditional Chinese medicines, pangolins are the most trafficked mammal in the world. Although other potential intermediate hosts were investigated early, including snakes and turtles, most attention has turned to pangolins after coronaviruses found in 2 separate batches of diseased pangolins being smuggled into China were found to be about 90% identical with the COVID-19 virus. So the pangolin virus is 90% identical to the one that exploded in humans. So not only is pangolin the only other mammal other than bats found to be infected with any kind of SARS-CoV-2-like viruses, but the critical receptor binding region of the pangolin coronavirus spike, the one that attaches on to our cells, was virtually identical between the pangolin strain and the human strain. Now, work is still underway to nail that down, but whichever the animal was, that one meal may have ended up costing humanity a few $1 trillion and a few million lives. Given the role exotic animal trafficking appears to have played in both the current global health crisis and the one in SARS, some of the international scientific community has called for a ban on the sale of wild animals, the closure of live animal markets. Even infectious disease experts in Wuhan started calling for a quote-unquote complete eradication of wildlife trading. And on January 26, 2020, the Chinese government announced a total ban on the trade and sale of wild animal meat, reportedly shutting down or quarantining almost 20,000 wildlife farms across 7 Chinese provinces, though the ban is only set to be temporary. After the SARS outbreak in 2002, Chinese officials enacted a similar ban on the trade of civet cats, but within months, the ban was lifted and the animals were back on the menu. Much of the wildlife trade is already illegal in China in the first place, with flaunted bans dating back more than a decade. Right, the Chinese pangolin, for example, is officially considered a critically endangered species. Right, so it's already illegal. So will the ban really help? Right, and in fact, that's part of the draw. The fact that they're critically endangered, that's part of the draw as a serving of extra rare, no pun intended, meats may project prestige and wealth, right? A thriving black market already exists and could potentially be driven even further underground by government action. The ultimate solution, wrote a group of scientists supported by the National Science Foundation of China, quote, lies in changing people's minds about what is delicious, trendy, prestigious, or healthy to eat, unquote. Having spent the bulk of my professional life trying to get people to eat healthier, to prevent chronic diseases, I can certainly relate, right? It's all about changing people's attitudes towards their food. Even in the unlikely event that the current ban were to remain permanent, and enforced effectively, there remains a glaring loophole. The ban exempts the use of wild animals for traditional Chinese medicines. So while it's currently illegal to eat pangolin meat, it's not illegal to eat other pangolin parts, right? How ironic that the pandemic appears to have arisen in a market selling remedies purported to promote immunity and longevity. Pangolin blood is said to promote circulation. For about $30 a pound, anyone could go online and buy Chinese bat feces to treat their eye disorders. Don't believe me? Check it out. I'll put it in the chat box in case anyone wants to go shopping. Now, while the drying of excrement would presumably inactivate any coronaviruses, the trade and handling of live and recently killed bats for use in these traditional remedies could infect people directly, or certainly introduce opportunities for cross-infection with susceptible animals. Now, look, it's easy for xenophobic Westerners to condemn cultures consuming rhino horns and tiger bones or pangolin scales, or 21st century manifestations such as so-called mukbangs, which are live streaming broadcasts of people eating bat soup and the like. But as I'll address in my upcoming book, the last pandemic, the 2009 H1N1 swine flu virus, arose not from some backwater wet market in Asia, but rather largely made in the USA from industrial pig operations in the United States. So for the emergence of SARS-CoV-3, we may need look no further than our own plates. And on that note, before diving deep into COVID-19, let me talk a bit about the new coronaviruses emerging from livestock. COVID-19 is actually the fourth coronavirus disease jumping from bats in the 21st century to cause deadly outbreaks. There was SARS in 2002, MERS in 2012, and then SADS, S-A-D-S, in 2016. A new disease killing up to 90% of young piglets. SADS, swine acute diarrhea syndrome, devastated industrial pig farms in the same region in China where SARS had broken out. SADS was traced to a coronavirus discovered in a bat cave in the vicinity. So one could say coronaviruses infected pigs right off the bat. All right, but the combination of deforestation and intensive pork production, where they're bringing millions of pigs encroaching into bat habitat, may have facilitated the coronavirus spillover from bats to pigs. Then there's porcine epidemic diarrhea, another presumed bat-to-pig coronavirus. In 2010, a highly virulent strain emerged in China. It caused massive outbreaks that, when it hit the U.S. 3 years later, killing millions of pigs, approximately 10% of the U.S. herd died. Porcine Delta coronavirus is the third pig coronavirus to emerge from China in the last decade, rapidly spreading coast to coast once it reached U.S. shores in 2014. This pattern of the emergence and spread outbreaks, new coronaviruses, appears to be accelerating. Now, currently, none of the emerging pig viruses appear to be able to infect humans at this time. But look, coronaviruses are known for their high rates of mutation and so-called recombination, the process by which viruses swap out parts of their genetic code to better adapt to their hosts or to find new hosts. The fact that so many livestock coronaviruses cause persistent infections that can spread rapidly among thousands of other animals confined in a closed environment increases the likelihood that a coronavirus mutant could arise with what's called an extended host range, meaning the potential to invite humanity to the party. Now, to trigger a pandemic, the virus would first have to spread to the lungs. Most coronaviruses in bats and livestock to date have been intestinal infections. The exception is infectious bronchitis virus in chickens, which I showed you the picture of. That's actually the first coronavirus ever discovered. It was discovered in a chicken. IBV is presently the major cause of respiratory infections in the 9 billion chickens raised for meat in the United States every year. but it's prevalent in all countries with industrial poultry production, with infection rates often approaching 100%. Currently, the only way IBV has been shown to cause disease in animals, though, is by being directly injected into their brain, in which case they do actually cause disease, but so far not otherwise. But with so many different coronaviruses circulating throughout so many different species, right, it's considered just a matter of if not when the next recombinant coronavirus will emerge and explode into the human population. Already, the spikes of the porcine delta coronavirus in pigs attach to the receptors found not only in pig intestines, but also to the respiratory tracts of humans. In a petri dish, it can infect both human and chicken cells. We know it can infect chickens themselves, just like there's a bovine coronavirus that can infect turkeys. Porcine delta coronaviruses can then rapidly spread from chicken to chicken once it jumps over to chickens. In fact, there's a new paper just came out February 2020 in the CDC's Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal that concluded that these porcine delta coronaviruses should be investigated for their human pandemic risk, given the susceptibility of human cells to infection. And now, SADS coronavirus can also infect human cells in the petri dish and infect mice in the laboratory. Given the ability of the SADS coronavirus to grow efficiently in human cell lines, a team of researchers recently concluded, quote, "We should not underestimate the risk that this bat-borne coronavirus would jump from pigs to humans," unquote. Now, obviously, when I do videos on all this, I'll have all the actual papers, all the actual quotes. I just didn't want to waste time kind of jumping back and forth to all the PDFs. But certainly, if anyone has questions as to the sources or anything, click that Q&A button. We'll get to your questions. Bottom line, pigs, not just pangolins, may act as a mixing vessel for the generation of new coronaviruses with pandemic potential. Coronaviruses are increasingly emerging and circulating across livestock populations around the world. The more new coronaviruses we have mixing in the more animals, the greater the likelihood that strains with pandemic potential will emerge. And while global pangolin populations are in drastic decline, we produce and slaughter more than 1 billion pigs each year, about half in China alone, raising the specter that the next pandemic may arise from domestic rather than wild animals, an event that actually may already have happened. And this is the last thing I'm going to cover before COVID-19. The last coronavirus pandemic may have been caused by livestock. Wait a second. The last coronavirus pandemic? Hear me out. Coronaviruses are the second most common cause of the common cold. So far, we've discovered 4 human coronaviruses that cause the common cold. So that makes 7 coronaviruses in all that can cause human disease. We suspect we got SARS from civets, MERS from camels, and COVID-19 perhaps from pangolins. Where did we get the common cold coronaviruses? Well, the origin of 2 of the 4 of the mild coronaviruses remains a mystery. But one, human coronavirus 229E, has been traced back to camels, and the other, called OC43, to cattle or pigs. Well, if the jump by the common cold from camels to humans foreshadowed the deadly MERS species jump that went on to kill 1 in 3 people, might the coronavirus jump from livestock to humans portend a deadly human outbreak as well? Well, it may already have. So-called molecular clock analyses dating the emergence of human coronavirus OC43 suggests that the bovine coronavirus now circulating, causing so-called shipping disease, jumped to humans around the year 1890. So cows to humans in 1890. And that's interesting timing. There was a pandemic in 1890. While the 1890 pandemic was presumed to be influenza, the timing of the emergence of human coronavirus OC43 has led some to conjecture that instead it may have been a COVID-19-like interspecies transmission of a coronavirus. And this is bolstered by the fact that the years leading up to 1890, there were massive culling operations to eradicate a deadly respiratory disease devastating cattle herds the world over. Look, now we may never know what caused the 1890 pandemic, but we can take steps certainly to prevent the next one. And that's actually going to be the main subject of my upcoming book, Pandemic Prevention. But before we deal with future pandemics, let's now address the existing one. Regardless of where the COVID-19 virus came from, now that it's spreading human to human, what can we do about it? MERS could be stopped because of its relatively low basic reproduction number, abbreviated R with a little subscript 0. That's the R naught. You may have heard about. The basic reproduction number, the R naught, is a measure of how contagious a new pathogen is. More specifically, it represents the number of people that a single infected individual is expected to pass the disease along to in a susceptible population. For MERS, the R naught was only 1. So each MERS patient tended only to transmit the disease to one other person, and unfortunately, it tended to be healthcare workers. Now, you can imagine how much easier a disease like that could be stopped compared to a virus with the potential to spread exponentially. A virus like SARS or COVID-19 with an R naught of 2 or greater, right? In the case of a virus with an R naught of 2, for example, unless stopped one individual, infected person could become 2, then 4, then 8, and so on, right? The coronavirus that causes COVID-19 may indeed be able to latch on to receptors in the human respiratory tract better than the coronavirus that caused SARS, but the primary reason that there were more COVID-19 cases in the first month after it was reported than SARS ever caused revolves less around how contagious it is and more around when it is contagious. The 3 characteristics of microbes most likely to cause pandemics are: number 1, novelty, has to be a new virus, so there's no pre-existing immunity. Number 2, respiratory spread, right? I mean, pneumonia is like humanity's 4th leading killer even outside of a pandemic. And number 3, transmission before symptom onset. The last 4 pandemics were caused by new flu viruses, each of which fit all 3 criteria. SARS, however, was not considered a pandemic, despite spreading to 29 countries and regions. Why did the WHO, the World Health Organization, only consider SARS a public health emergency of international concern rather than a pandemic? And how were we able to stop it within just a few months at only about 8,000 cases and 800 deaths? It was a brand new virus, spread by respiratory droplets, but SARS lacked the 3rd necessary characteristic: significant spread before symptoms arise. For SARS, the average incubation period, the time between first becoming unwittingly infected after exposure to the virus and then first coming down with the symptoms, was around 5 days. But it took an extra 6 to 11 days for viral loads to ramp up in the upper respiratory tract secretions coughed or sneezed out onto from one person to the next. So even after falling ill, patients with SARS weren't very infectious in the first 5 days or so of illness. Since viral loads peaked around 10 days after people started feeling sick, you could see how human-to-human transmission could be stopped if patients could just be isolated for a few days after the onset of symptoms. And that's exactly what happened. A massive international effort spearheaded by the WHO was able to identify all the cases because of their symptoms, isolate the patients, and then trace all their contacts. That's how we were able to also effectively eliminate smallpox from planet Earth, because smallpox is only contagious after you know who had it, right? Only after you got the pustules could you spread the disease, so we could see who had it. So fever screenings at airports helped stop the global spread of SARS in its tracks. You didn't become particularly infectious until after symptoms arose, and 100% of SARS patients developed a fever. So in that way, stop people with fevers, you stop SARS, right? SARS was a disease designed to be stopped. With MERS, 98% of the patients became febrile. Now, in the case of COVID-19, though, as many as 36%, more than 1 in 3, do not present with fever at the onset of symptoms. And more seriously, patients may be infectious during the incubation period with no symptoms at all. With COVID-19, you can feel perfectly fine, no symptoms at all, but actually have the disease and spread the disease before the first cough, before you get a fever or any symptom, right? It's the same with the flu. That's how new flu viruses can trigger pandemics too. In fact, the viral loads in asymptomatic patients with COVID-19 were found to be similar in some cases to symptomatic patients, about 3,000 viral copies for every quarter teaspoon of snot, right? Same amount of virus in symptomatic snot taken from someone who just turned sick compared to asymptomatic snot, right? Spewing just as much virus before you even know you have the disease. So, like the flu, you could potentially spread the disease before you know you have it, even while you're feeling particularly fine. Now that is a disease that's hard to stop. To slow the spread of that kind of disease, where you don't know who's infectious and who's not, you have to try isolating everyone. And that's where all this social distancing comes in. Locking down cities, closing non-essential businesses, stopping, canceling gatherings, encouraging people to shelter in place at home are all attempts to break every possible chain of transmission. China was condemned for its early response, sanctioning critics and denying the extent of the crisis, referring to it as preventable and controllable, but was later lauded for that same authoritarian approach when it came to successfully enacting extreme quarantine measures. Top WHO official praised China's efforts as quote, probably the most ambitious and I would say agile and aggressive disease containment effort in history, unquote. It was, however, too little too late to contain the disease locally. By the time authorities banned travel out of Wuhan, more than a third of the 14 million residents had already left the region, whether for a Chinese New Year holiday or to flee before the lockdown of the city went into effect on January 23rd. Now, one could argue, had local officials instead not wasted weeks trying to silence whistleblowers and releasing these false reports, the world could have been spared this pandemic. But the aggressive actions China subsequently did take may have indeed actually brought the rest of the world some time to prepare for, of course, the countries that took advantage of that time, unlike some other countries. Enacting so-called wartime control measures, China initiated the largest community containment effort in human history, affecting about 750 million people. Borders were closed, cities were sealed off, and people were confined to their homes. Now, unlike the lockdowns we have here, right, in other countries, that's, still allow people to venture outside as long as, we stay a certain personal distance. In China, citizens were totally restricted with permission cards that only allowed them to leave their home every second day for a maximum of 30 minutes for essentials. Right? The policy was criticized by human rights advocates, but it worked. The epidemic immediately started decelerating. Chinese authorities achieved what many public health experts didn't think was possible: containment of the spread of a widely circulating respiratory infection. Within 2 months, Hubei province, ground zero, where the disease first emerged, reported its first day of no new local cases. The Director General of the World Health Organization said in a press conference, "I will praise China again and again because its actions actually help in reducing the spread of this novel coronavirus to other countries," unquote. Of course, the day Hubei province reported no new cases, the world confirmed its 200,000th case. Would the rest of the world be willing to enact rules one global health policy specialist called astounding, unprecedented, and medieval? The command and control authority of the Chinese government allowed them to enforce a resource-intensive containment strategy that involved cost of trade, travel, and liberty that many doubted democracies would be able to stomach. Thankfully, successful strategies in countries such as Singapore and South Korea showed that such draconian measures may not be necessary. All the nations that were able to get this disease under control quickly relied on a foundation of testing and tracing. What that means is you identify all the cases through mass testing and then trace every possible contact each patient had to break as many chains of transmission as possible through isolation and quarantine. South Korea had a test approved the first week of February and ramped up to test as many as 18,000 people a day through dozens of these fast, free drive-through testing stations. With such expansive, well-organized testing, countries like South Korea were able to control the epidemic without resorting to locking down its populace. The World Health Organization took notice. We have a simple message for all countries, the Director General declared: test, test, test. The United States did not appear to get the message in time. By mid-March, South Korea had already tested more than 250,000 of its citizens, more than 5,000 out of every million, compared to fewer than 100 per million in the United States. Hamstrung by FDA red tape and a series of blunders, sufficient U.S. testing capacity failed to materialize before the window on containment had already closed. It's humbling to realize that the U.S. and South Korea recorded their first case on the same day, first respective cases on the same day, yet the ensuing epidemics took very different courses, right? Theirs went up and down, and ours just keeps going up. Once containment fails, the strategy then shifts to what's called suppression and mitigation. If you don't know who's infected, all you can do is try to prevent everyone from coming in contact with anyone. By mid-March, 1 in 4 Americans were being told to stay home to try to curb the spread. As Dr. Fauci told policymakers and the public, if it looks like you're overreacting, you're probably doing the right thing. Closing non-essential businesses and encouraging people to stay inside to limit social contacts are efforts in an attempt to flatten the curve, flatten the epidemic curve. In other words, to slow the spread of the illness, to more evenly distribute the cases over time. This would give healthcare systems time to scale up and respond effectively, not only to treat COVID-19, but to maintain overall care continuity, right? During the recent Ebola crisis in West Africa, for example, deaths increased from other causes across the board due to the saturation of the healthcare system, as well, of course, as the death of healthcare workers. Let me see what time it is. We are about to take a break. Let me just do a little more here. School closures, actually a little more controversial, as they would threaten the availability of the 29% of healthcare providers in this country who live in households that need to take care of young children. One model suggested that school closures might have to reduce COVID-19 cases by more than 25% to make up for the loss in healthcare workers in terms of overall net reduction in COVID-19 mortality. Now, a 25% drop is achievable in pandemic flu because influenza is a disease in which children play a critical role in community transmission. But children don't appear to be the main drivers of the transmission of COVID-19. Until an effective vaccine is available, likely not until 2021 at the absolute earliest, population lockdowns can help rob the virus of susceptible hosts. Once such measures are relaxed, though, the disease could come roaring back. In the pandemic of 1918, for example, some U.S. cities experienced a second peak in mortality following the lifting of social distancing measures. By periodically pumping the brakes with flattening the curve strategies like shelter-in-place ordinances to slow community transmission, the hope is that we can turn this initial tidal wave of cases into a series of smaller, successful waves that our healthcare capacity could more safely ride out. If not, more intensive care units in U.S. hospitals will become overwhelmed, just as they did in Italy, and doctors will have to make triage decisions as to who lives and who dies, right? It's better to be 6 feet apart than 6 feet under. And on that note, we are going to take a break right now. Let me see here. And we'll be back very shortly. And here we go. Are you ready? Quick, grab something to drink. right, we are back. Okay, so I was just talking about overwhelmed ICUs having to potentially put in place triage protocols, and they've actually already been published. First in line for ventilators are those who have most likely to survive in the short term and over the subsequent year. Then the priority goes to children and adults under the age 50, then 50 to 69 in the next tier, followed by those age 70 to 84, then finally 85 or older. If there's a tie, like if you have two people in the same age bracket with the same chances, then life-saving ventilation may be allocated based on what they call some form of lottery. In other words, flipping a coin. In the New England Journal of Medicine, a preeminent group of medical ethics experts wrote, "We believe that removing a patient from a ventilator or an ICU bed to provide it to others in need is also justifiable, and that patients should be made aware of this of this possibility at admission." Adding, "The decision to withdraw a scarce resource to save others is not an act of killing. It does not require the patient's consent," unquote. Wow, can you imagine? To relieve frontline clinicians of this burden, they suggest the designation of triage officers to make these decisions. The countries that were able to mobilize the fastest and have been best able to control COVID-19 were those who had learned hard lessons from previous outbreaks. China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan bear the memory of SARS. More recently, South Korea suffered a major MERS outbreak in 2015, triggered by a businessman returning from the Middle East. The country's test and trace infrastructures were therefore in place, and its populations primed to sacrifice for the promise of containment. If outbreaks involving dozens or even hundreds of deaths can rally countries to a state of pandemic preparedness, perhaps the thousands or even millions of deaths from COVID-19 will orient countries of the world to the mission of pandemic prevention. But first, what can each of us do individually to ride out the current pandemic? Just to see where we are here. Let's go back to our topic screen. Okay, so we just finished slowing a pandemic, bullet 2B. Now we're going to be moving on through going through the clinical course, bullet 2C, then treatment, avoidance, disinfection, masks, etc. But first, the clinical course. What does COVID-19 look like these days? With an average incubation period calculated about 5 days, we have nearly a week before the moment we get sufficiently exposed to the virus and the moment we start showing symptoms. In those 5 or so days, we are infected and potentially infectious before we even know it. About 98% of those who are going to start showing symptoms do so by age 12, which explains why people are typically quarantined for 2 weeks after potential exposure. So average is 5, but 98% by day 12. After infection, so after you've recovered, viral shedding may still continue for more than a month with an average of 22 days, though it's not clear how contagious survivors are during this extended time period. The most common symptoms are fever and cough, experienced eventually by 90 and 70% of patients respectively, based on analysis of more than 50,000 COVID-19 patients. And so 90% fever, 70% cough, though not necessarily as a presenting feature. Now, only about 4 in 10 experience fatigue, 3 in 10 coughing up phlegm, and 2 in 10 experiencing muscle aches. And only about 1 in 10 suffer from gastrointestinal symptoms like nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea, and only 1 in 10 suffer common cold type symptoms like runny or stuffy nose, headache, or sore throat. All right, so if you have those kind of symptoms, it's much less likely to actually be COVID-19. And this is consistent. The fact that common cold symptoms are so rare is consistent with the regional concentration of ACE2. Those are the receptors that the virus latches onto. And where they found concentrated, they're found concentrated in our lungs rather than our nose and throat. So for example, rhinoviruses that cause the common cold, they latch onto the ones in your nose, these receptors in your nose, but COVID-19 latches onto the ones in that are concentrated in your lungs. Although in pangolins, actually, the ACE2 is found on their flicking anteater tongues. The only symptom found predictive in terms of a more severe course, like what's a bad symptom to have, was difficulty breathing, understandably, which resulted in more than 6 times the odds of eventually having to be admitted into the ICU. So that's why that's such an important symptom to catch early. So if you are having difficulty breathing, that's the red flag to immediately seek medical attention. This notion that the course of about 80% of cases are mild is derived from analysis by the Chinese CDC. That was based on about 45,000 confirmed cases. Now, while there are certainly mild and even asymptomatic cases, it's important to understand what mild means to the Chinese CDC. Its definition of mild, including those with walking pneumonia, meaning pneumonia not dire enough to require supplemental oxygen or hospitalization, right? But pneumonia nonetheless, right? I mean, when you think mild, you don't think pneumonia. Certainly not the kind of common cold type courses people might think when they hear the word mild. Though the cases were at least mild enough that people should be able to treat themselves at home, right? So 80% should be able to treat themselves at home. The remaining 20 or so percent of confirmed cases are classified as severe. So that's split up into 15%. So 80% can treat at home, 15% actually have difficulty getting enough oxygen, so we have to give them supplemental oxygen, and then 5%, so it's 80, 15, 5, are critical. And that involves respiratory failure, septic shock, multi-organ system failure. About half of those critical cases will end up dying. So about 80% mild, 15% severe, 5% critical. Though, of course, that does not involve all the asymptomatic cases that escaped detection completely and never became confirmed cases at all, right? These were just confirmed cases. Okay, so who is more likely to suffer a serious course? The severity of COVID-19 varies widely based on pre-existing conditions. Those with high blood pressure have twice the odds of suffering a severe course, and those with cardiovascular disease, like heart disease, 3 times the odds. And what's more, those with either condition, hypertension, high blood pressure, or heart disease, about 4 times more likely to end up in the ICU. Those with COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases like emphysema, understandably, appear to be at the highest risk, 6 times the odds of a severe course, nearly 8 times the odds of ending up in an ICU. So people with emphysema are the highest risk in terms of a severe course. In a history of air pollution, so just like mild lung damage caused by air pollution, we also increase susceptibility, but this is crazy. Ironically, the number of lives saved by the decreased air pollution in China, thanks to the lockdown, may exceed the number of people killed by the virus, right? Averting as many as 30,000 premature deaths a month. Okay, let me explain that. The air quality in China is so bad that COVID-19 may have ended up saving lives, like 1,000 lives a day, because the industry is down. The air pollution is cleaner. Right now, that is crazy. Of course, they just started lifting those restrictions, so people will again be dying from air pollution-related diseases. Anyways, as with the other 2 deadly coronavirus diseases, SARS and MERS, those with diabetes also appear to be at higher risk, though based on a retrospective SARS analysis, optimal blood sugar control during treatment may improve prognosis. So even if you have diabetes, if you're able to keep your sugars good, then you should be able to mediate some of that risk. Excess body fat alone seems to be a risk factor independent of diabetes. Those with a body mass index of 28 or more appear to be at nearly 6 times the odds of suffering a severe COVID-19 course. In the United States, and so, obesity is 30 or more, right? Overweight is 25 or more. So we're just talking overweight, not even obese, right? So over a BMI of 28, nearly 6 times the odds of suffering a severe COVID-19 course. In the United States, the average BMI is more than 29. So so we're not, so just being overweight. In fact, being skinnier than the average American still puts you at that huge, huge elevated risk. But even without the weight, most American adults over age 50 suffer one of these comorbidities, over 50%, even without the obese, without the overweight. And so that's one of the reasons the United States is so susceptible to this illness, because most older people and most of the entire population, because of obesity, the obesity epidemic, and it's just the excess body fat epidemic. Most are over BMI of 28, which is a serious risk factor. Okay, so look, I know I have my infectious disease hat on right now rather than my lifestyle medicine hat, but you know, we should not allow it to pass without comment that the major comorbid conditions for COVID-19 severity and death, obesity, heart disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, all of which can be controlled or even reversed with a healthy enough plant-based diet. Just saying. On that note, I'm going to take a quick sidebar now to talk about the whole ACE inhibitor drug and ibuprofen thing. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but people who are following this very closely, I think, will be appreciative, particularly clinicians. Okay, turns out history of smoking, like duh, is a risk factor for disease progression. Though surprisingly, active smoking may or may not be. This seeming paradox may provide a clue as to why those with hypertension appear to be at higher risk. You know, it's easy to imagine why those with heart disease are at higher risk of crashing from COVID-19. Lung infections can put tremendous strain on the heart. Up to 30% of patients hospitalized with just regular pneumonia before the pandemic develop cardiovascular complications. About 1 in 35 suffer cardiac arrest. And those who don't are still at 4 times higher risk of heart attack or stroke within the first 30 days after being released from a hospital. So if you know a grandparent who went to the hospital for pneumonia within that next month, 4 times likely to get a heart attack or stroke, right? Okay, so you can understand why any kind of a pneumonia puts stress on the heart, and heart disease would be a risk factor for death. But why is just having high blood pressure a COVID-19 severity risk factor? Under certain circumstances, those hospitalized with regular pneumonia with hypertension may actually do better. Investigators speculate this may be due to the anti-inflammatory effects of a common class of blood pressure drugs called ACE inhibitors, like lisinopril, for which there were more than 100 million prescriptions dispensed annually in the United States. So that's like 1 in 3 people. Or enough for 1 in 3 people. Okay. So these are super common drugs. And indeed, people taking these drugs not only appear to be less likely to die from pneumonia, but they seem less likely to even get pneumonia in the first place, right? Because they think these blood pressure drugs have anti-inflammatory effects. Okay. Ironically, the same reason why those with hypertension may be protected from regular pneumonia may also be the reason why those with hypertension are at greater risk from COVID-19. ACE inhibitor drugs may be anti-inflammatory, but they also upregulate the expression of ACE2, which, as you may remember, is the enzyme the COVID-19 virus latches onto in our lungs to infect our cells and spread. So perhaps the reason why those with hypertension seem to be doing worse is because so many of them are on this class of drugs, which may be making them more susceptible to viral attack. ACE2 expression is indeed increased in these comorbid conditions, but the drug connection has yet to be verified. Like, we didn't actually ask these patients, wait a second, are you on these drugs or not? Certainly those who are taking these drugs for heart failure or severe or uncontrolled hypertension should not stop taking them, right? This is, you know, when ICUs are overwhelmed, not the time to have a stroke. However, the vast majority of people taking these drugs are for treating, you know, well-managed mild hypertension. For those patients, physicians may want to consider temporarily discontinuing ACE inhibitor drugs for those at high risk of contracting COVID-19. Now, those of you who follow me on social media know that early on I recommended that people consider not taking ibuprofen unnecessarily, as it's another drug that can boost ACE2 expression. Now, while the concern remains theoretically, look, no drug is completely benign. In fact, NSAID drugs like ibuprofen cause intestinal lining damage in as many as 80% of users, right? So no drug should be taken unnecessarily. And furthermore, NSAID use, ibuprofen use, is strongly advised against in both children and adults with pneumonia. In fact, because it's been associated with higher complication rates. In fact, fever may actually be beneficial and probably shouldn't be routinely treated by any means, right? If you have a fever, then, cold compresses to the face can make you feel better without actually changing your internal temperature, which is actually good to help you fight off the infection, right? Having said all that, those taking prescribed low-dose aspirin for cardiovascular disease should continue with that treatment. Okay, to bring it full circle on the whole ACE thing, the ACE2 connection may also offer some insight into the inconsistent findings between current and past smokers. Nicotine downregulates ACE2. So while it's always a good idea to quit smoking, this may explain why active smokers may or may not be necessarily at significantly higher risk for COVID-19 progression. Anyway, that's it for my little high blood pressure ibuprofen sidebar. Advanced age, also a key risk factor for COVID-19 progression. Although the disease has, affected newborns as only a few days old through people in their 90s, most patients, around 90%, in one large case series, are between 30 and 79. The severity of disease, however, disproportionately affects older individuals. In China, the average age of those requiring intensive care was 62, compared to non-ICU cases, it was average was 56. In the United States, even those 65 or older without underlying conditions or other risk factors appear to be hospitalized or end up in the ICU at approximately 3 times the rate at those aged 19 through 64. So it's not just because older people have more comorbid conditions, although that's certainly a part of it. Because South Korea has done such widespread testing, they have some of the best data. So let me actually show you that data. Okay, here we go. Okay, so of confirmed cases in South Korea, if you look at people in their 30s and 40s, only about 1 in 1,000 chance of dying. So if you're healthy in your 30s and 40s, only about 1 in 1,000 chance of dying. But for those in their 50s, that rises to closer than 1 in 150, 1 in 150 chance. Those in their 60s, 1 in 50 die on average. Those in their 70s, it's more like 1 in 12. And then those in their 80s, 1 in 5 lost their lives to COVID-19. And now let me turn you over to US data. Okay, US data, here we go. Okay. So though the relative lack of testing makes US data less reliable, that's why I wanted to show you really probably the best data, which is out of South Korea. But based on the first 1,000 cases of in the United States that just got reported, this was just out March 27th, you can see the age-related deaths are similar here. Here I can highlight this here. So if you look at this chart here, you'll see that it looks very similar in terms of age ranges and case fatality than we saw in South Korea. Now note these are percentages. Lots more young people are getting infected. So if you look just at the absolute numbers, and that's this chart right up here, if you look at the absolute numbers, you can see a big chunk of people are getting hospitalized, sent to the ICU. Look at ICU. So here's the breakup of ages. You say, wait a second. The ICU, the risk of getting hospitalized I mean, the number of cases being hospitalized, the number of cases going to the ICU is very similar, but that's because there's a lot more people getting infected in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s than there are later on. So hopefully that's understandable, right? So, but the reason I wanted to show you this though, is because yes, when you're older, you do have a higher risk as an individual, but look at this chart. Lots of people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s are suffering significant disease right now. Lots of hospitalizations, lots of ICUs. And so that's important to not underestimate this disease. The vulnerability of our seniors to the pandemic was really exemplified, I think, by ground zero of the first major US outbreak. A nursing home in Washington state, of the home's 130 or so residents, 101 out of 130 became infected and more than a third lost their lives. On autopsy, the respiratory surface of the lung under a microscope appears obliterated by scar tissue. Pulmonary fibrosis, lung scarring, is expected to become one of the long-term complications among survivors of serious COVID-19 infection. So even if you survive, so if you looked at, they did a 6-month follow-up of SARS survivors, found that 1 in 3 showed evidence of scarring on chest x-ray, and 1 in 6 showed a significant impairment in lung function. So this was 6 months out after they got better. Death from COVID-19 comes from progressive consolidation of the lung. That's a medical term, which just means your lungs start filling up with something other than air. In the case of regular pneumonia, it's largely pus. But in COVID-19 pneumonia, postmortem show you drown in lungs that are quote unquote filled with clear liquid jelly, unquote. Yikes. Okay, on to how to treat COVID-19. Currently, there are no specific proven therapies for COVID-19. More than 400 clinical treatment trials are underway though, but we should not expect a vaccine or effective antiviral drug to be available anytime soon. Understandably, many of you have asked me for advice on what they can eat to help bolster their immune system. How not to die from infections was, after all, the title of chapter 5 of my book, How Not to Die. I do have more than 100 free videos online at nutritionfacts.org that address immune function. And there are amazing studies, like randomized, double-blind studies showing, for example, that eating broccoli sprouts can reduce viral loads of influenza, decreased virus-induced inflammation, and boost antiviral natural killer cell activity. And they double-blinded against alfalfa sprouts. But that was decreasing viral loads for influenza. That's the flu. This is not the flu. I certainly support general common sense advice to stay healthy during the crisis, put forth by trusted authorities like the World Health Organization, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. This includes getting sufficient sleep, 7 to 9 hours, keeping active, reducing stress, staying connected, albeit remotely, to friends and family, and eating healthfully, a diet centered around whole plant foods. I've resisted the urge to jump on the snake oily spam wagon of foods to boost your immune system, given our near total ignorance of the immunological aspects of this new disease. Enhancing specific arms of the immune system, while that certainly can be done with different foods, could hypothetically even make things worse. And let me explain what I mean by that. The assumption that the elderly are more susceptible to serious COVID-19 due to the waning of their immune system with age may not be correct. Look, young children also have relatively immature immune systems, yet and they normally actually suffer disproportionately from viral infections like the flu, but not apparently from COVID-19 or SARS or MERS for that matter. Likewise, immunosuppressed patients normally at greater risk of severe complications from respiratory viruses, but again, That does not appear to be the case with COVID-19 or the two other deadly coronaviruses. Immunosuppressed patients were not necessarily at higher risk, like you normally see with respiratory viruses. In contrast, our own immune system, our own immune response may be the main driver of lung tissue damage during coronavirus infection. All right, let me say that again. Our own immune response may be the main driver of lung tissue damage during coronavirus infection. So it's kind of like an autoimmune reaction where your body overreacts, and in attacking coronavirus in your lungs kind of get caught in the crossfire. So you can see why, maybe it's not such a great idea to boost specific parts of the immune system. One theory as to why children seem protected suggests that greater pre-existing exposure to common cold coronaviruses offer kids some kind of cross protection against the new virus. But ironically, a competing theory suggests it's their lack of exposure to similar viruses that's safeguarding them. Let me explain. There's a phenomenon known as ADE, antibody-dependent enhancements. In other words, the antibodies our bodies makes to target pathogens typically, neutralizes them, or at the very least tags the invaders for removal. Sometimes, though, antibodies can actually facilitate viral infection and exacerbate disease. And this may be the case with SARS, where antibodies developed against the viral spike proteins were sometimes found to promote infection, right? In monkeys, they gave them experimental SARS vaccine, actually aggravated lung damage, right? Now look, vaccine developers are well aware of this phenomenon and would work to ensure any commercial vaccines would be free from this failing, but it has been used to venture a guess to account for this unusual age distribution for severe COVID-19 cases. Perhaps similar coronaviruses circulated silently a few decades ago, and so those who are old enough to have been exposed to them are now experiencing exaggerated responses to COVID-19. Young people, though, they weren't born when these coronaviruses were circulating, so they don't get this overreaction. Now, I'm not suggesting this speculation is true, right? I just use it to illustrate the complexity of our immune interactions, right? Pathogens attack, we counterattack, and then sometimes pathogens evolve to use our own counterattack in their favor, right? Our own antibodies, they use those to make the disease worse, right? So just a word of caution before trying to specifically boost some element of our immune system before understanding the full scope of the new threat. Given the uncertainties, the best strategy is to not get infected in the first place, or at least until effective treatments and a functioning healthcare system are available. Okay, and so that's what I want to talk about next, how to avoid getting infected. But first, let me do a little sidebar on zinc. I looked into zinc lozenges as a potential treatment after the fact-checking site Snopes validated that a noted virologist did indeed send out an email making a recommendation in February to stock up on zinc lozenges. Now, we based this supposition on the efficacy of zinc for the common cold, and up to 29% of common colds are caused by coronaviruses. Now, there is actually a really sweet backstory to this whole subject. A 3-year-old girl undergoing chemotherapy for leukemia, which is a disease caused by low zinc levels, refused to swallow a zinc supplement. Immunosuppressed, she just started developing a cold. Instead of swallowing the supplement because her throat was sore, she just let it dissolve in her mouth, and the cold seemed to disappear within hours. Okay, little anecdote, but this observation led her own father, to conduct the first randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial on zinc lozenges for the common cold. And that's how it all started. And by the way, she did fine, went on to grad school and did great. Okay. And there has since been more than a dozen Let me just, it's cool. It's cool. I'm just making a note to myself. I remember reading about how well she did, and I was like, oh, I got to put that in the book. So that was just my little reminder to myself. Okay, so that's how it all started, and there's since been a dozen randomized controlled trials published, and overall, researchers have found that zinc is indeed beneficial in reducing both the duration and severity of the common cold when taken within the first 24 hours of symptom onset. Zinc lozenges appear to shorten colds by about 3 days. That's significant, right? I mean, you feel kind of lousy in a cold, imagine that's 3 days shorter, with significant reductions in nasal congestion, discharge, hoarseness, and cough. Okay, now, but if you look at the medical literature, you'll see that the common cold results for zinc are often described as mixed results. But that's probably because some studies use zinc lozenges containing added ingredients like citric acid that strongly sequester the zinc. So there's little or no free zinc actually released, right? They taste better, but what's the point if they don't actually get you any zinc, right? So that's why some studies showed that it didn't work. Well, they didn't actually release the zinc. Okay, so this is the way you do it. Lozenges containing around 10 to 15 milligrams of zinc as either zinc acetate or zinc gluconate without zinc binders such as citric acid, tartaric acid, glycine, sorbitol, or mannitol, taken every 2 waking hours for the first few days, starting immediately upon symptom onset, may work best. Best for the common cold, but what about for COVID-19? Okay, so anyway, before I get on to what zinc for COVID-19, that's the kind of thing when you get the recording of the webinar, you might want to look back to if you ever get a cold. So anyway, okay. But, okay, so what about for COVID-19? Okay, well, so we know zinc works for the common cold. How? Well, there's 3 proposed mechanisms for the protection afforded by zinc. The first is that it interferes with the attachment of rhinoviruses. That's the most common cause. Coronavirus is the second most common cause of the common cold. Rhinoviruses are the first. It interferes with the attachment of rhinoviruses to our cells. And so, well, that's the case. Well, then it's a completely different attachment. It's a completely different virus. Then it wouldn't help us with COVID-19. Because COVID-19 uses a different docking receptor, the ACE2 in our lungs. Okay. So if that's the mechanism, then it's not going to work. A second purported mechanism is it appears to slow rhinovirus replication, like in a petri dish. So actually slows the ability of the virus to reproduce. And that was also found for the original SARS coronavirus. So in a petri dish, you add zinc to cells infected with the SARS coronavirus, and replication is actually slowed down. But that was in conjunction with a chemical used to ferry the zinc inside the cell. So they didn't just give people zinc, they gave people this adjunct chemical. And now there are these natural dietary compounds that may play a similar function in terms of getting zinc into our cells, but even if viral replication were able to be slowed down in the throat where the lozenge is, the COVID-19 virus is thought to propagate primarily in the lungs, not the throat. That's not where the lozenge is, okay? So if that's how it's working, by directly in contact, slowing the replication of the virus, you're not inhaling the zinc, right? So we wouldn't expect it to help. Okay, but there's a third proposed mechanism why zinc may help, and that's more promising. Zinc boosts antiviral immunity. So just having more in your body. So, whether you took it by a pill or a lozenge or anything. So for example, giving zinc pills to children with severe pneumonia has been shown to reduce mortality. So a simple, super cheap zinc tablet, and this is not a lozenge, they actually swallow the zinc pill, reduce the risk of dying from pneumonia as much as 3-fold over placebo. But all those studies were done in countries like Uganda, India, and Ecuador, where we're presuming they had pre-existing zinc deficiency. So yeah, taking zinc if you're zinc deficient, no wonder that helps, right? But it's unclear if we can get similar benefits in higher income countries where we have less micronutrient deficiencies in the population. So I have my doubts that zinc is going to help with COVID-19 in well-nourished individuals. And for those of you who've been following my work, you are by definition a well-nourished individual. So I doubt zinc is going to help. But if taken as directed, it shouldn't hurt. Though zinc supplements and lozenges can cause nausea, very important, especially when taken on an empty stomach. So they're not completely benign. And one should never put zinc in your nose. You go to the drugstore, you're going to find all sorts of intranasal zinc gels and sprays and swabs, but they've been linked to potentially permanent loss of one's sense of smell. And we haven't followed these people out for the rest of their life. They still haven't got it back years later, but they may never be able to smell anything the rest of their lives because they put the zinc in their nose. So don't do it. Okay. Whew. Okay, now we are moving on to how to avoid coming down with COVID-19 in the first place. Governments can only do so much. Preliminary evidence from Japan suggests the cancellation of events, gatherings, and meetings may slow the spread of COVID-19 by as much as 35%, but that has not been enough to contain the outbreak. So that kind of thing helps, but not enough. During the unbridled phase of a pandemic, the best thing you can do, shelter in place. Staying home to reduce contact with those outside of your households as much as possible if you are able. And you can't just wait to see if it's in your area. You know, I grew up in Wyoming, which only has about 200 confirmed cases in the whole state as of yesterday, right? But by the time a single death occurs in your community, hundreds or even thousands of cases are likely already present. And look, we just haven't done the testing, right? So unless you're like on some remote desert island, right, a remote desert island with really good internet, if you're watching this there, then you should assume that the virus is in your neighborhood right now, wherever you live. Now, those of us who need to leave our homes to provide essential services, from direct care to food delivery, should strive to keep a safe distance from others and to sufficiently sanitize our hands every time we touch a public service before we touch our mucous membranes, meaning our eyes, the inside of our nose, or mouth. Once the pandemic is more under control and ample testing is in place and we have an army of public health people on the ground to trace people and trace contacts, and once the healthcare system is no longer overrun, then these social distancing precautions may start to be relaxed, at least for less vulnerable individuals. But look, you cannot infect others if you're not infected, and you can't get the virus unless the virus can get to you. That's why we stay inside. As far as we understand, the COVID-19 coronavirus is thought to be transmitted from one person to the next via respiratory droplets coughed out by infected individuals, propelled through the air and then landing up your nose, in your mouth, or perhaps even on your eyes of a person nearby. Indirect avenues of spread involve infecting your own self by touching your eyes, nose, or mouth with hands contaminated by a virus-laden object or surface, such as rubbing your eyes or picking your nose after shaking someone's hand, or touching a public surface like an elevator button, gas pump handle, handrail, a toilet flusher, right? The level of virus swarming in the snot of COVID-19 sufferers can reach close to 1 million per drop at the height of infection, right? Which explains how easy it is for them to so thoroughly contaminate their surrounding environment. The presence of COVID-19 coronavirus in stool samples suggests another way toilets could potentially transmit infection beyond just touching the flusher, touching the handle. As you may remember in my Why You Need to Disinfect Your Toothbrushes with White Vinegar video, modern flush toilets aerosolize a plume of up to 145,000 droplets of toilet water into the air, which can remain floating around for at least 30 minutes. This may be one of the ways poliovirus, for example, is transmitted. So close the lid when you flush, and then, of course, thoroughly wash your hands. During the SARS outbreak, traces of the virus were found not only on items directly handled by the patients, like remote controls, and the surfaces touched by those who interacted with the patients, like a refrigerator door at the nurse's station, but also SARS was found floating in air samples taken from an infected patient's hospital room, suggesting the possibility of more robust airborne transmission than just these larger coughed droplets. Now, a similar study initially performed in a COVID-19 patient's hospital room was negative. They found it on the majority of sampled surfaces, but not actually in the air samples. But since then, we've learned differently. Studies performed at the Nebraska Biocontainment Unit and the National Quarantine Unit have found that the majority of air samples tested positive for the traces of the virus, even in the hallways outside people's rooms. However, the researchers weren't unable to verify if the airborne virus was infectious, given the extremely low concentration, less than 100 copies of virus per cubic foot of air. So that's very few viral particles. We're not sure, first of all, if they were even alive. We just picked up through genetic fingerprinting. And we don't know what the infectious dose is. So we're not sure if we could get infected that way. Nonetheless, because the virus can remain viable for hours when experimentally misted into the air, special care should certainly be taken during aerosol-generating medical procedures for all you healthcare workers watching. Okay, how long does the virus last on contaminated surfaces? That we do know, that it contaminates surfaces. You may have heard that coronaviruses, like flu viruses, are enveloped viruses. Enveloped in what? Well, they are wrapped in a stolen swath of our own cell membranes. As they bud out of our infected cells, they cloak themselves in the outer layer of our own cells, right? And that oily coating helps them hide from immune surveillance because they look just like us. They're wrapped in our own cells, like camouflage. But it also makes them susceptible to disinfection and environmental inactivation. Now, non-enveloped viruses like polio can persist for weeks outside the body, whereas enveloped viruses tend to only be able to survive for days. As enveloped viruses go, though, coronaviruses do tend to be relatively resistant. There's a coronavirus that infects pigs, for example, that can last for a month on non-porous surfaces like metal, plastic, or glass. But at most, human coronaviruses only make it about a week. On copper and brass, coronaviruses may not be able to survive longer than a few hours. Different coronaviruses have different environmental stability, though. The SARS coronavirus lasted more than 6 days dried on plastic, whereas one of the common cold coronaviruses didn't make it even 3 days. The SARS virus lasts up to 4 days in water and soil, but survived just a few minutes after drying on paper or cotton when lightly soiled, or up to a day when heavily contaminated. Okay, but what about SARS-2, the coronavirus that causes COVID-19? All right, well, let me show you some of that data. All right, the COVID-19 virus appears to be more stable on paper than the SARS virus, paper like cardboard, with infectivity extinguished after only about 24 hours at the same viral load that led SARS to become inactive at about 8 hours. The half-life of the COVID-19 virus on steel or plastic is about 6 hours, so about 99% is gone by 48 hours. You can see that here and here. But it may take as long as 96 hours for infectivity, all infectivity, to disappear. On cloth, COVID-19 may only last for a day, but on the outer layer of surgical mask, it can survive for a full week. COVID-19 virus also can, survives less than 3 hours on printing paper, though. So copper, brass, and printing paper are the three surfaces that the new virus doesn't only last a few hours on. But the virus can only infect you, though, if it can get inside you. Having the virus on your fingers is only a problem if you then inoculate yourself by transmitting the virus to your eyes, nose, or mouth. It's funny when they do experiments on like the common cold to see if transmission is through the air or through touch. Let me actually show you this just because it's so interesting. Yeah, here. Here they so here we go. So this is on the transmission of cold viruses. What they do to see if it's airborne transmission or touch is they put people in these crazy arm braces, which makes them so they can't bend their elbow, so they can't touch their face regardless, because people touch their face so often that they can't just tell people don't touch your face. They put them in these arm braces. Then you can see how much is actually coming through the air and not. But having the virus on your fingers is only a problem if you then inoculate yourself by transferring that virus to your eyes, nose, and mouth. It's not your face in general. Touching your forehead, cheek, or chin is presumably no more dangerous than touching your elbow, right? The virus cannot pass through your skin. Why? Because the virus isn't alive. It can only replicate inside live cells. It needs your cell's machinery to reproduce. Can't reproduce on its own. And the outer layer of your skin, all over your body, is covered by protective layers of dead skin cells that get sloughed up. You're constantly making new skin cells, and the top layers are dead. That's why the virus can't infect your skin, can't get through your skin. This virus can. To get into your lungs, the virus has to find its way to your mucous membranes, the moist lining of your eyes, nostrils, or mouth, because the outer layer of your moist membranes are live cells that can get infected. And you say, well, wait a second, how does a virus get from your eyes down into your lungs? Well, you know how your nose starts to run when you cry? That's because your tears drain through tiny channels through your nasal bone and deposit, spill into your nostrils. And so viruses on the eye can travel that same route and get into the back of your throat and down into your lungs. Okay, but hey, as long as you don't touch your face, why does it matter if surfaces are contaminated? Because you do touch your face. Right? The oft repeated 23 times an hour statistic is actually an overestimate, since most of the touches recorded in that study were just touching the skin of their face. But 10 touches an hour were to the eyes, nose, or mouth. And those would be dangerous touches. Adults, and that was a study done on college students, adults videotaped in an office type setting did worse, touching their eyes, nostrils, or lips on average nearly 16 times an hour. What about doctors? Physicians and other paramedical professionals were covertly observed during a grand rounds lecture at a hospital. And I can attest to this, having given many grand rounds at hospitals. About 40% picked their nose at least once. And this is during like a 40-minute lecture. 40% of the audience members picked their nose at least once. In family medicine offices, clinicians and staff touched their eyes, nose, or mouth on average 19 times in 2 hours, with a range from 0 to 150 touches. More concerning in terms of patient safety, however, was the finding that doctors only wash their hands about 30% of the times that they should, even in intensive care units. And even when they did wash their hands, it was only for less than an average of 9 seconds, which, as we all know, is insufficient now. Because it's so difficult to keep people from unconsciously touching their face, it's critical to be able to disinfect your hands. So let me now move to the how to inactivate COVID-19 section of the webinar. Hand disinfection can be accomplished by properly washing your hands with soap and water. The CDC recommends sudsing up for at least 20 seconds. Now, it's not clear why they chose that duration. Unsurprisingly, there is evidence that washing with soap for 20 seconds is preferable to washing without soap for 5 seconds, but most of the published soap-to-soap studies compared 15 seconds to 30 seconds and have found that there does not appear to be a meaningful difference between 15 and 30. The recommendation to wash your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds was likely made to encourage sufficient hand coverage. And using invisible did I swap over to that? Here, let me share that. Here we go. Using invisible fluorescent or UV dyes, researchers have found that the most frequently missed areas when washing your hands include, as you can see here, your fingertips, the thumbs, particularly the back of the thumbs, and the back of your hands in general. So these are the areas. In fact, there's actually, you can do a science experiment. There's something called glow germ, which is this UV light dye that you put on your hands. You can't even see it, but then you wash your hands and you see the areas. Then you put it under UV light, and all of a sudden, all these areas that you didn't actually wash pop up. And these are the particular areas. So these are the areas you want to make sure that you are washing. All right. Artificial nails are discouraged by the CDC as they've been shown to interfere with hand washing efficacy. Should you use hot water? How many people think you need hot water? Raise your hands. There should be a little raise hands button. There we go. All right, click on the raise hand button if you think you need to use hot water to wash your hands. Okay, we are now at 300 participants. Just raise their hand. 400 participants raise their hands. 450. We're at 500. 500. All right, and 510. All right, it turns out that about 517 of you are wrong. But most of you are right. There is no need to use hot water. Contrary to popular belief, studies going back more than 80 years show no benefit for germ removal when using hot water over cool water. And frequent hand washing with hot water may increase the risk of skin irritation. And in addition, the false belief that warm or hot water is preferable may also add an additional 1 million metric tons of carbon through energy usage to the atmosphere from the United States alone every year. Just some food for thought there. But again, cool water is preferable just because you're going to be washing your hands so often that using hot water increases the irritation you get from hand washing. But you can use lotions and skin creams have been shown to protect your hands from the minor skin damage associated with frequent hand washing at any temperature, regardless. Now, for healthcare professionals, both the World Health Organization and the CDC recommend using alcohol-based hand sanitizers, whether gel, foam, or spray, over hand washing for routine hand disinfection. That is, when hands are not visibly soiled. And part of the reason they prefer alcohol-based hand sanitizers over hand washing is enhanced compliance, right? Just for the same reason that we can't rely on people to not touch their face, we can't rely on people to wash their hands properly. In that family medicine clinic, that was tested, surveyed, fewer than 1 in 10 hand washings even met the 10-second version of the CDC standards, right? Less than 10% even got to the 10-second standard, right? In contrast, more than 8 out of 10 instances of disinfection with alcohol-based cleansers hit the mark, right? And that simply entails, rubbing your hands together until the alcohol covers all surfaces and then just waiting for the product to dry completely. So it's easier to do it right with an alcohol, hand sanitizer than it is to do it right with hand washing. This is not to say, now in a laboratory setting, and you actually watch people and you actually do the hand washing, there may be a different story, but out in the real world, that's why they say do the alcohol hand sanitizer, because people are more likely to do it right. cheap and ubiquitous at dollar stores everywhere before a pandemic, hand sanitizers, one of the first items to disappear from store shelves and internet inventories when COVID-19 loomed. Now, of course, anyone heeding my decade-old advice for pandemic preparedness already has had stocked up 14 years ago. Should be well supplied, but if not, you can make your own. Although 40% alcohol, either ethanol, which is the regular drinking alcohol, or isopropyl alcohol, which is typically found in rubbing alcohol, 40% alcohol has been found to kill some envelope viruses on contact, like SARS and MERS. Others, like hepatitis C and Ebola virus, require 60% alcohol or more, as measured on a volume per volume basis, not a weight basis. So that's why alcohol concentrations for hand sanitizers range from 60 to 80%, because they want to hit them all, right? Understandably. They want to account for a wide range of pathogens. So it's the same, there's not like a special Ebola hand sanitizer, special hepatitis C hand. It's just the one hand sanitizer to rule them all. Okay. Oh, I got to put that in the book. That's good. Okay. Okay. So, okay. But look, we're in a pinch. What do we specifically need for COVID-19? And we didn't know until about the inactivation of new coronaviruses until data was posted mid-March. Now, on Snopes, the social media meme that a homemade hand sanitizer made from Tito's vodka could be used to fight the new coronavirus was ruled as a false rumor, since most vodkas, including Tito's, only contain 40% alcohol, and Snopes cited the CDC's 60% minimum rule. However, a respected team of researchers funded by the European Commission and the German government found that the COVID-19 virus could indeed be inactivated within 30 seconds by just 30% alcohol, either ethyl alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. So 30% alcohol, 70% water wiped out the COVID-19 coronavirus. Now, in that case, a variety of hard liquors could indeed be repurposed for use as hand sanitizers for COVID-19, either straight or even diluted to a certain extent. Most vodka, rum, brandy, gin, and whiskey exceed 30% of alcohol by volume. So, from a COVID-19 standpoint, there are still bottles of hand sanitizer available on the shelves, but just on the shelves of liquor stores, not on the shelves of drugstores. Right? It's funny, guests in my home are surprised to see so many big cheap plastic bottles of 120 proof vodka in my wine rack, especially for someone who doesn't drink at all. I stocked up, over a decade ago, following my own pandemic prep guidelines to make extra DIY budget-friendly hand sanitizer for the coming outbreak. With the current virus, it looks like I could even do a 50-50 dilution. I got the 120 proof with 60% alcohol, because who knew what was coming next? But now, if it's just 30%, I can actually cut it and make it last longer. Now, the new data has yet to be replicated. This is the first study to look into it. And it hasn't even been formally published in a peer-reviewed journal. It's a so-called preprint, because I want to get this information out as quickly as possible, but it is a highly respected research team. And look, 30% alcohol is not enough to kill other pathogens, right? So I still recommend sanitizers with 60 to 80% alcohol, if you can get them. But in a pinch, during this crisis, it's nice to know that there may be some alternatives. The WHO and interim FDA guidelines for those making their own hand sanitizer include the use of an emollient, 1.45% by volume glycerin, also known as glycerol, to help keep the alcohol from drying your skin, as well as adding a preservative, 0.125% by volume of the standard 3% hydrogen peroxide to kill any contaminating bacterial spores. But what's important for inactivating the virus, so the hydrogen peroxide has nothing to do with the virus. That's just for bacteria. What's important for inactivating the virus, though, is the alcohol content. So assuming 30% alcohol is sufficient, and assuming you had all the ingredients, you can make a gallon of COVID-19 hand sanitizers by combining 12 cups of an 80 proof liquor with a quarter cup of glycerin and a teaspoon of regular strength hydrogen peroxide, and then just fill up the rest of the gallon container with water. You could also quarter the recipe to make a quart, 3 cups of liquor, a tablespoon of glycerin, and a quarter teaspoon of hydrogen peroxide, and then the rest water. But for this particular virus, the easiest method would probably just be to use the 80 proof liquor straight up as a hand sanitizing rub. Just pour it in a squirt bottle or spray bottle and apply enough to completely cover all surfaces of your hands and then rub together until dry. Now, the addition of a gelling agent such as aloe vera is not recommended, as it may compromise antiviral efficacy. That's why, for example, when you have to, well, I'll talk about this, but when inactivating the COVID-19 virus on a surface that's grossly contaminated with like mucus, you need to use like 10 times the bleach concentration as if there's a clean surface. It's because the protein in mucus and feces and other bodily fluids can actually protect the virus. And the same thing with some of these gelling agents, protect the virus. And so we don't want to be adding extra ingredients like perfumes or gelling ingredients at all. Okay. Anyway, so I know that was kind of quick. Let me paste that all into the chat box. I'm going to paste the basic recipe and then the fancy recipe. Okay, so I just put that in the chat box, so you can copy paste that if you're interested. Okay, so now let me move on to the inanimate surfaces I just alluded to. Bleach. Oh my God, I totally missed our, I was on such a roll here. Okay, we're gonna take a break. I'm sorry, a delayed break. I'm gonna take a 5-minute break right now, and then we're gonna get to how to inactivate the virus on surfaces. Sorry, I missed our break. All right, where are we? There we go. 5 minutes and go. And go. Sorry again for that late break, everyone, but I'm glad. I hope everyone got hydrated and did what they needed to do. We are now on to decontamination, not your hands, but inanimate surfaces. Bleach is recommended for disinfection. 1 part household bleach diluted in 49 parts water. So that's about 1 teaspoon of bleach per cup of water. Now, if you look at the manufacturer's instructions, what you also see is a 1 to 100 dilution of bleach. That's sometimes recommended, but that may not be sufficient based on data from another human coronavirus, in which 1 in 100 didn't work, but 1 in 50 did. Now, note this 1 to 50 recommendation is for standard bleach, meaning 5% sodium hypochlorite bleach. You just got to read the label. If you have 2.5% hypochlorite bleach, you have to use twice as much, 2 teaspoons of bleach per cup. And if you have really concentrated 10% hypochlorite bleach, you'd only need to use a ½ teaspoon per cup. The bleach solution should be prepared fresh. So it's not like you just make a whole bunch of it and can stand there, because it becomes less effective over time. So you make it fresh every time. And it's recommended you leave that on the surface you're disinfecting for at least 10 minutes. Though when actually put to the test, 5 minutes of that concentration was found to wipe out the COVID-19 virus. But the recommendation is for 10 minutes. Either way, you want to keep it there for a while. Now, excuse me. As I noted, surfaces grossly contaminated. That's a medical word meaning visibly contaminated with bodily secretions, blood, snot, or poop, right? May require a stronger bleach solution. So we're talking 1 part standard bleach for 9 parts water, left for 10 minutes. That's a really strong bleach solution. So I'm gonna paste all that into the chat box because it's hard to kind of, to remember all that. Okay, so I just put that in the chat box. So for inanimate surfaces that are clean, for inanimate surfaces that are visibly contaminated, how much with all the dilutions. Oh, and then the important note, never mix bleach with other cleansers. Right? Bleach reacts with ammonia, which is found in a lot of glass cleaners and stuff, to create hazardous gases called chloramines. And it reacts with acids like vinegar. A lot of people use vinegar for cleaning. That's an acid. Toilet bowl cleaner, drain cleaners, many automatic dishwashing detergents are also acids. And when you mix acid with bleach, you create chlorine gas, which is also toxic, right? So don't ever mix bleach with any other cleanser. Now you say, well, wait a second, what about surfaces where you don't want to use bleach on, right? Like metal. Bleach can stain metal or even corrode metal. And so in that case, you use alcohol. So alcohol can be used on surfaces that aren't suitable for bleach. And also there's some other disinfectants, sufficiently concentrated povidone iodine, chloroxylenol, chlorhexidine, and benzalkonium chloride also have been shown to clear the virus within 5 minutes. And let me paste the exact concentrations into the chat box. I could have just spewed them all out, but no one's going to remember them. So I just put those in the chat box. So the exact concentrations of all those different disinfectants, you look at the label and see, have been shown to clear the virus within 5 minutes. Note that a straight soap solution though, so like 1 part hand soap, liquid hand soap, 49 parts water, appears to take 15 minutes to kill the virus. And so if like that's all, if you don't have bleach, you're just using, you have some soap though, and you're just using soap, you got to leave that on longer before you wipe it off. And so 1 part soap to 49 parts water, that would be again 1 teaspoon liquid hand soap and a cup of water. Now dishwashing detergent works even faster, though, because again, the virus has that oily coating. So liquid dish soap, and now this is not against COVID-19, this is against the SARS virus. So we're not sure, but that same 1 to 50 dilution of dish soap to water worked within 5 minutes, like some of those other disinfectants. But no word yet on dish soap and the SARS-2 coronavirus. Within 30 seconds, Lysol disinfectant spray and a 1 to 64 dilution of Pine Sol destroy murine hepatitis virus. Now that's a mouse coronavirus. So who cares about the mouse coronavirus? Well, how are you supposed to do these experiments in a lab? Do you want to be playing around with the COVID-19 virus in a lab? That's dangerous. So what they use are surrogate viruses. So they use a coronavirus found in mice and be like, well, it's a coronavirus. This other thing's a coronavirus. So let's test against that. And if you test against that, both Lysol and the 1 to 64 dilution of pine salt kill off the virus, but have yet to be tested against the COVID-19 virus. In a pinch, wine vinegar, 6% acid wine vinegar, 6% acetic acid, was shown to destroy more than 99.9% of the SARS virus within about 60 seconds, but again, no word on COVID-19. But again, we are in times where it's difficult to get disinfectants, so it's nice to know all potential options. Now, although the EPA suggests common quaternary ammonium compounds should be effective, I found an old paper that reported they were virtually useless as a sole disinfectant against viruses dried on surfaces, including one of the common cold coronaviruses, though, as I said before, benzalkonium chloride has been found to be effective against SARS-CoV at 0.1% for 5 minutes. And the most macabre decontamination advice I found was published in the Journal of the Chinese Medical Association, quote unquote, corpses should be burned or buried deep, unquote. Okay, let's see where we are here. Let's go back to our topics page. Oh, there we go. Okay, as you can see, we've gotten up through bullet 2F, how to inactivate the COVID-19 virus. Next up, what to do if you come down with the disease. Okay, ideally, once you become infected, you would be safely quarantined away from your family in a so-called fever clinic, which is the dedicated facility designed to assess, test, treat, and triage patients so you wouldn't be putting people you live with at risk. Fever clinics were one of the strategies used to bring the outbreak in China under control by preventing clusters of family infections. Many of the people first getting infected were infecting their family members, right? Because it's close contact. Now, of course, we don't have fever clinics here. In lieu of such innovations, the best choice is to try to recover at home, isolated as much as possible from your housemates. Preferably, you should avoid contact with both people and pets and be cordoned off in a sick room with a separate bathroom if necessary. Oh, hold on. I just got a message here. Okay. Okay. Did I just say cordon yourself off from your pets? Yes. A quick note on pets. In rare cases, dogs have been found to be infected with the new coronavirus, but the virus replicates poorly in canines. They just don't seem to get sick and don't seem to be able to pass the virus to others. But the COVID-19 virus has been shown to reproduce efficiently in cats. However, they not only does it replicate within them, even though they may not get sick, they're able to experimentally transmit the virus to other cats kept in separate adjacent cages. So they couldn't actually touch each other, but still spread cat to cat, so suggesting it's some kind of respiratory droplets. Even in cats that appear perfectly fine, but that were infected. A survey of 102 cats in Wuhan province after the outbreak found evidence of infection in 15 of the cats, including some of the stray cats, presumably because people infected them. Just like with when dogs got infected, it's presumably human to pet infection. In the US, the only confirmed case of animal infection to date that I know of was a sickened tiger at the Bronx Zoo. That's all I was able to find on pets in the medical literature. But if you have any questions, again, just queue them up by pressing the Q&A button. Okay, to reduce the risk of spreading the disease to those you live with, if you're sick, Cover your nose and mouth with a tissue when you cough or sneeze. Throw the used tissue in a lined trash can, and then immediately sanitize your hands. Don't share household items such as eating utensils, towels, or bedding. Wash your hands often. Routinely disinfect all high-touch objects such as phones, doorknobs, toilet surfaces in your sick room, and ideally bathroom yourself. You don't want someone else to do it. Let someone else clean and disinfect the rest of the house. Running the exhaust fan in the bathroom all the time. Opening the windows in your sick room to enhance ventilation all the time if possible. And based on surrogate coronaviruses, using a humidifier if the air is dry. All of those things may cut down on viral circulation. Now, if you're sick and must be in the same room with someone else, like you live in a studio apartment or something, you should wear a face mask. That's what masks were originally designed for, so-called source control rather than self-protection. They're meant to protect others from you rather than you from others. Common cold coronaviruses, as well as flu and rhinoviruses, can be detected in exhaled breath, not just sneezing and coughing. And surgical masks can cut down on the amount of virus you exhale out into the world. Now, we have yet to know if this is true of COVID-19, but the head of the Standing Committee on Emerging Infectious Diseases at the National Academy of Sciences, which is the most prestigious scientific institution in the United States, told the White House quote, currently available research supports the possibility that SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 virus, could be spread via bioaerosols generated directly by patients' exhalation, meaning we can breathe the virus from person to person. And that shouldn't surprise anyone, right? After all, respiratory droplets are not just gobs of mucus. I think that's what people have in the back of their mind. But when your breath fogs on a really cold day outside in the winter, that's respiratory droplets. That plume of vapor coming out of your mouth is made up of tiny droplets of water straight from your lungs, right? And you're breathing out that same plume, that same cloud on warm days. It's just invisible. You just don't see it, right? So err on the side of caution and assume the virus is in your breath. Okay, so if infected individuals are exhaling virus before they even know that they have it, then hey, maybe everyone should be covering their faces in public. Now, the CDC initially resisted such a measure, a decision that the Director General of the Chinese CDC referred to as a big mistake, quote unquote. However, last week, the US CDC did start recommending wearing face cloth coverings. That's tough to say 5 times fast. Face cloth coverings in public settings where other social distancing measures are difficult to maintain, such as grocery stores or pharmacies. So if you're like out in a park and there's no one around, then it's not a problem. But if you can't keep that distance from people, a face cloth covering. And I think that 180 shift in policy is probably best exemplified by the US Surgeon General's swing from tweeting, seriously people, stop buying masks, all caps, exclamation point, to being featured a few weeks later, demonstrating how to improvise masks out of a bandana and rubber bands. You can actually see him do it on the CDC site. And indeed, the CDC now has easy no-sew instructions at bit.ly/CDC-DIY. And let me paste that into the chat box. I'm not going to actually go to the site just because we're running low on time, but you can go to it, bit.ly/CDC-DIY, or I've posted the full address as well. Now, cloth coverings are no substitutes for masks, but may be better than nothing. So let me show you the data. Let me show you 2 studies. Okay, here we go. Okay. All right, so this study tested the efficacy of various household masks found. So here's what they looked at. I hope you can see my little mouse cursor. So they looked at various household masks and found that scarves, pillowcases, and 100% cotton t-shirts were probably the most suitable household materials, blocking various bacteria and viruses, about 60% as well as surgical masks. So here's the surgical masks here. Here, let me do a little highlighting here. Here's where the surgical mask comes in, so you can kind of compare the other things to where a surgical mask, oh, here we go. Surgical mask can do. Now you'll note that vacuum cleaner bags, right, worked better than those other things. I mean, right up alongside the surgical masks, but problem is they're considerably harder to breathe through. So that's why something like a t-shirt might be better. And then let me show you this other one. So this, again, comparing different kind of cloth masks. If you go down here, this is fascinating. Okay, so note that the y-axis here is penetration. So higher is worse. Now here is the N95 masks. So you can see N95 less than 5% penetration. So at a particle size where the N95 mask blocks more than 95%, because it's less than 5 penetration, so this is blocking 95%, something like masks made out of t-shirts only blocks about 10% here, right? A mask made out of scarves blocks more like 20%. Sweatshirts about 30% on average, and towels closer to 40%. You know, it's interesting here seeing this Hanes, so Hanes t-shirts seem to do no better than any of the other t-shirts, but for some reason Hanes sweatshirts appear to have some edge. Of course, the study was funded by Hanes. Just kidding. No, it wasn't. Anyway, all right. Okay, regardless of which you use, cloth face coverings should be washed regularly. So when you get back, you should immediately wash them. And with detergent, obviously. Okay. Now, even though face coverings are intended to protect others from the wearer rather than the wearer from others, masks have been recommended previously for those at high risk and unavoidably crowded settings, actually for self-protection. And in hospital settings, for example, mask wearers appear to be comparatively protected during the SARS epidemic. However, even 3 to 4 layers of cloth in the form of cotton handkerchiefs only filters a fraction of what simple surgical masks can block. So improvised masks didn't help during 1918, for example. They didn't have surgical masks. They just had these gauze masks, these layers of gauze. And they found that to get the necessary protective filtration, you had to use so many layers of gauze that breathing was difficult and air just kind of leaked around the edges. So that's probably why it didn't work. The World Health Organization still doesn't think that routine mask wearing in public is necessary. And one of the reasons is that they're concerned that it might lead to a false sense of security and neglect more important measures such as hand hygiene and social distancing. People will think, well, they can come right up to one another because they got masks on. That's not true, right? On the other hand, I could see how wearing a mask might prompt people to avoid touching your face. When you got something on your face, I mean, when you have to pull your mask down to pick your nose, you're less likely to pick your nose, right? And I see the same benefit from wearing gloves in public, right? I mean, seeing bright purple gloves on your hands can serve as kind of a constant reminder, right? And yes, you can still breathe in virus while wearing a mask, and you can still contaminate yourself with gloved fingers, but anything that keeps you constantly conscious about the position of your hands and stops you from touching your face might help. So you got purple hands, purple, your hands are purple, you go to touch your eye, you're like, whoa, I got purple hands. Oh, maybe I shouldn't be touching my eyes. Anyway. Okay, and speaking of self-conscious, if everyone wore masks in public, symptomatic patients who definitely should be wearing masks wouldn't fear being singled out for stigma and hence help slow the pandemic across the board. Now, of course, universal use of face masks in public during a pandemic can only be considered if supplies permit, and sadly, inadequate preparation, misuse, and hoarding have led to a critical shortage of personal protective equipment gear for those on the front line. And that's why the CDC is recommending cloth face coverings instead of surgical masks, not because surgical masks don't work better, but because unbelievably, our doctors don't have them, whereas, of course, countries like China, South Korea, everybody had more than enough masks for everybody. But that's another story. Okay. Here, let me show you another paper here. Things are getting desperate when an editorial in the Journal of the American Medical Association entitled Sourcing Personal Protective Equipment During the COVID-19 Pandemic includes as a proposed recommendation, they suggest coffee filter masks. Things are getting desperate here, even in the richest country on earth. Anyway, okay, a little sidebar. In addition, for those who are sick and necessarily exposed to others, so who should be wearing masks? Those who are sick and can't avoid other people. So if you're in a studio apartment and if you have a mask, you wear the mask to protect from infecting your housemates. Surgical masks are also advised currently when disinfecting a residence that may have been exposed to the virus. Someone that you live with is off at the hospital dealing with it and you have to disinfect the house. You should wear a mask if possible. Also wear disposable gloves. Open up all the windows while mopping the floor, cleaning all surfaces with the disinfectant solution, and wash all linens and clothes, including the clothes you just wore cleaning. So you have to have a separate clean set of clothes. Wash with detergent. And as always, take care to not touch your eyes, nose, and mouth when removing your mask, and carefully wash your hands afterwards. Now, I've mentioned N95 masks a few times. Let me just do a quick sidebar on those. Surgical masks, as the name implies, are typically meant to protect others, right? The patient opened up in front of the surgeon on the operating table. N95 masks, also known as N95 respirators, those are the cup-like masks that fit tighter to the face. You see like painters wearing them and things. They are intended to protect the wearer. The WHO and CDC, they have conflicting guidelines as to what healthcare workers should wear during the routine care of those patients with COVID-19. The CDC, along with the European CDC, recommends N95 respirators, whereas the WHO suggests that surgical masks are sufficient. Now, part of the WHO's reluctance to endorse N95s may be out of a sensitivity to the global scarcity of such resources, but the underlying transmission dynamics of COVID-19 remain largely unknown, so we can't say for certain if N95s would actually work better. The relative importance of direct respiratory spread of COVID-19 versus indirect contact via contaminated objects is unclear. For other respiratory illnesses like the common cold, breathing appears to be more important than touching. That's what that arm brace study showed. For example, in one rhinovirus experiment, only 50% of those touching contaminated coffee cup handles actually became infected. For the flu, the relative importance of transmission continues to be debated, which is pretty remarkable since we've known about the influenza virus for nearly a century now. Now, note that N95 respirators only work at peak efficiency if they conform completely to the face. They aren't for everyone. For example, they're not suitable for people with facial hair, right? Even 1 or 2 days of beard growth can significantly undermine the necessary seal. They also must be used properly. In a laboratory setting, N95 respirators have been found to be very effective. But out in the real world, a review of the best science on preventing the spread of respiratory viruses found no evidence that the more expensive, irritating, and uncomfortable N95 respirators were superior to simple surgical masks. That was the quote. Not that N95s aren't better at filtration, but perhaps due to poor compliance. I mean, I remember how uncomfortable they were when I used to work with tuberculosis patients. So that would support the WHO recommendations that N95s aren't necessarily better in real world settings, though if you do know what you're doing, then they presumably would come out on top. But look, even with the perfect mask sealed over your mouth and nose, your eyes are still exposed, leading to the suggestion that medical workers wear goggles. Monkeys can be infected by dripping the COVID-19 virus into their eye. But a retrospective study of SARS, at least, found no documented cases of transmission to healthcare workers that didn't use eye protection. So that's at least a little hopeful. But until we know more about the transmission of this virus, it would seem prudent that for those in close contact with coughing patients to err on the side of caution and use both eye protection, like at least a face shield, and N95 respirators. During the SARS outbreak in North America, regular surgical masks were initially recommended, but the advice switched to N95s after doctors started dying. Okay, that's what I have on N95s. Again, any questions, please make sure to ask them. Although, boy, it's getting late. I want people to understand that we have opened up. We're going to do a special 2-hour Q&A session dedicated just to the pandemic next week. Next Thursday, I'm going to do a full hour on Facebook Live, then a Q&A just on the pandemic, then a full hour on YouTube Live, same day. If you're looking at your watch right now and you need to get to Passover Seder and you're afraid there's not going to be enough time for questions, there won't be enough time for, well, with 5,000 people on the call, there's never enough time for questions. But know that whatever questions I don't get to today, we're going to do 2 full hours of Q&A tomorrow. And then the following week, I have my regular Q&A, monthly Q&A. So that's another hour. So we got 3 hours of Q&A coming. So don't stress about the time. But I know I wanted to do more Q&A, but there's just, again, so much information that I wanted to get through to people. But I will try to take questions at the end here. Okay, finishing up on the what to do if you get it section. Most people who contract COVID-19 spontaneously recover without the need for medical intervention. If you come down with it, then protect those around you, get rest, stay hydrated, and monitor your symptoms. If serious problems arise, such as difficulty breathing or prolonged, persistent pain or pressure in your chest, seek medical attention. But call your doctor or emergency room first before heading in, since they may have specific instructions for suspect cases in your area. So they may not want you showing up to the emergency room. Maybe they want you at the Javits Center. Maybe they want you at some special place they've set up so as to properly triage patients. Now the CDC advises that once your symptoms start getting better, once you've been fever-free for 3 full days off of any fever-reducing medication, so really fever-free for 3 days, and it's been at least a full week since your symptoms first appeared, if all those 3 things are met, feeling better, fever-free for at least 3 days, and it's been at least a week since the first symptoms arrived, then you can start relaxing your home isolation. The World Health Organization disagrees. More conservative, recommending self-quarantine for a full 14 days for anyone with symptoms or anyone living with anyone with symptoms. So they're like, if you've been exposed to somebody, no matter how careful they've been, they don't want you going outside for 14 days either. Okay, now I want to shift gears to look towards the future. For example, will COVID-19 just go away naturally as warmer weather approaches? That's been suggested. We should not count on it. Though the common cold coronaviruses follow a seasonal pattern like the flu, peaking every winter, there are other respiratory virus infections that peak in the spring or the summer. In fact, MERS coronavirus, the last deadly coronavirus to cause an epidemic, peaked in August in the sweltering heat and blistering sun of the Middle East, right? So it's like 120 degrees outside, and that's when it was at most active. Okay, so that's why we shouldn't count on it. The mechanisms underlying the seasonality of viral respiratory infections remains a subject of scientific debate. It's likely a combination of factors involving the virus itself, for example, viral viability at different temperatures and humidities, host immunity, for example, different vitamin D status or the drying of our airways during the winter, and host behavior, like, we're all crowding inside during the winter. However, the near universal susceptibility to novel pandemic viruses may supersede these seasonal factors. So all recent flu pandemics emerged not in the winter, but in the spring or the summer, right? Though secondary waves did tend to hit during the following winter. Even if the contagiousness of the COVID-19 virus does drop this summer in the Northern Hemisphere due to warmer, wetter weather, it is not expected to make a large dent in the pandemic curve. What would stop the pandemic is herd immunity. In other words, having a critical portion of the populace immune to the virus. An infection can only burn through a population if there's enough susceptible individuals for the viral sparks to jump from one person to the next. Immune individuals who can't get it or transmit it act as fire breaks, as like control rods in a nuclear reactor, right, to break the chains of transmission. Now, ideally, this is accomplished through mass vaccination, right? Vaccines are a way to fight fire with fire, using the virus to fight the virus by generating the benefits of infection, immunity, without the risks, disease and death. Without a vaccine, herd immunity is only achieved the hard way through mass infection. The proportion of the population that needs to acquire immunity to stop the pandemic can be roughly estimated from that basic reproduction number I alluded to before, the number of people a single infected individual tends to go on to infect. And let me try the whiteboard here. I've never done that on Zoom, but let's give it a try. Whiteboard, here we go. Okay, whiteboard. Okay, here is the basic equation. Hopefully people can see this. I'm actually not gonna write it. I'm gonna see if I can type it here. There we go. Okay, here we go. So this is the basic equation. In fact, let me, I don't like this. Okay, I'm gonna try. Oh, that's not working. Hold on, I'm trying to draw here. Oh, no, that's us. Okay, hold on. There's my little R naught. Okay, okay. So in this equation, R naught is the basic reproductive number, and P crit, that should be lowercase crit. Anyway, the subscript crit is what we're looking for. P crit is the minimum proportion of a population needed to be vaccinated or have recovered with subsequent immunity to smother the outbreak within the population. So if every COVID-19 case leads to, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not even sharing this, am I? Am I sharing it? Can you see this? I think you can. Normally there's like a little green box around things, but I think we're good. Yep. Oh, okay. Everyone all of a sudden started raising their hands. I don't know if that means, yes, I can see it, or no, I can't see it. That's funny. Anyway, okay. This is the problem with doing a whiteboard thing. Okay, but hopefully people can see this. Okay, so if every case of COVID-19 leads to 2 others being infected, so if R naught, that should be a little teeny 0 down there. If R naught is 2, then half of the population may need to be vaccinated or infected before the pandemic dies down, right? Let me see, how do I move this thing over? Okay, right? Then, so then half the population may need to be infected or vaccinated for the pandemic to die down. But what if each person infects an average of 4 others? Well then, one would need closer to 3/4 of the population to be immune to stop it. Now, this is an overly simplistic model, but offers kind of a ballpark approximation. So the question then becomes, what's R naught for COVID-19? Let's pull that up. Here we go. Oh, that's not it. Oh, where's my R naught? Oh, herd PDF. I should have it here. Oh, hold on. I've got it. I thought I had it loaded, but maybe not. Let me see if I have it. There it is. Okay. So now let me share again. Share screen. Share screen. We're going to go to, there we go. Okay. So here is an approximation of all the R naughts. If you can see this, based on the R naught estimates for COVID-19 virus from large outbreaks in affected countries, the minimum population immunity required ranges from about 30% here, based on what we saw in South Korea, which is an R naught estimate of 1.43, all the way up to like another country with lots of cases, Spain, up to 80% of the population, because there the R naught was more like 5. One person infected 5 different people. And so this is why, the reason I wanted to show you all this, this is why it's so important to enact curve flattening measures like social distancing to reduce the number of contacts and drive down the basic reproductive number as low as possible. You don't want to have to wait until 80% of the world is infected before we stop the pandemic. Now, of course, this is all working under the assumption that people who recover from COVID-19 acquire immunity to reinfection. It works in rhesus monkeys, or at least 2 rhesus monkeys. Scientists re-challenged 2 recovered monkeys with the COVID-19 virus and were unable to successfully reinfect them. We don't yet have a definitive answer as to whether humans become immune after infection. But the fact that at least a small case series reported potential benefit of something called convalescent plasma, that's a good sign. That's the transfusion of blood products from a recovered patient to someone who's actively sick. The fact that that seemed to help does suggest the buildup of at least temporary immunity, because we're transferring antibodies to the sick person. Basically, we have 3 lines of defense against viral reinfection: circulating antibodies that can neutralize the virus, memory B cells that can create new antibodies upon re-exposure to the virus, and memory B cells are the reason why people can remain immune to chickenpox for 50 or more years. It's not that you have circulating antibodies to chickenpox all the time, but you have the memory B cells that remember chickenpox and can start churning them out if they ever see chickenpox again. And then thirdly, memory T cells that can help hunt down virus-infected cells. Now, the benefit of convalescent plasma derives from the antibodies, but a 6-year follow-up of studies of patients recovering from SARS found that about 90%, 22 out of 23, no longer had any detectable anti-SARS antibodies in their bloodstreams. But that's okay, right? Because their memory B cells could just make more, right? Unfortunately, not a single SARS-specific memory B cell was found in any of the former SARS patients. So it's definitely not something like chickenpox where you get it once and that's it, right? Now, about 60%, 14 out of 23, were able to mount a memory T cell response. So it's not clear if that alone would be able to protect them from reinfection. So it's possible that years after SARS infection, they could get reinfected with SARS. And again, the COVID-19 virus is similar to SARS, though of course we have no data yet long-term for that. Unlike HIV though, which keeps parts of itself hidden to evade the immune system and establish a long latent infection. You know, the the COVID-19 virus appears to take more of a kind of a smash and grab approach. It brazenly displays its array of spike proteins to better bind to its victim, but counts on jumping ship before immunity develops by quickly being coughed onto a new host, right? Now, this bodes well for both the possibility of post-recovery acquisition of immunity and the prospects of vaccine development. A trait that COVID-19 does share with HIV, however, is its rapid mutation rate. You know, one reason RNA viruses like HIV and coronaviruses and the flu represent a higher pandemic threat than those who use DNA as their genetic material is that viral RNA replication is sloppy. Every copying cycle can result in multitudes of mutants, most of which probably aren't even viable. They're just so mutated they can't even replicate. But the flip side of this intrinsic inefficiency, right, is that sometimes rare mutants may arise from this diverse population of variants. It's called a viral swarm, a mutant swarm. Sometimes really rare mutants may evolve that that come exploding out of each infected cell that are either better adapted to the current host or tailored towards new hosts. And the high mutation rate of coronaviruses may help explain their proclivity to jump the species barrier in the first place. But the question we now face is what this new virus will do next. The genetic sequences of viral copies recovered from COVID-19 patients around the world have already diverged by as much as 15% as different strains of the virus circulate around the globe. Now, in the SARS epidemic, certain early mutants went on to dominate, which led to the supposition that genetic adaptation to humans was helping to drive the outbreak, but that remains to be substantiated. Though continued mutation of COVID-19 virus doesn't yet offer insight into the direction of the evolution may be taking, we cannot rule out the possibility that the virus could transform in the near future to become even more transmissible or dangerous. Not a happy thought, but there's worse. And that is where I move on to the last topic under discussion, which is really the most important topic as far as I'm concerned, and that is COVID-19 silver lining. Are you ready for a little silver lining at this point? And that is this last topic here, the COVID-19 pandemic as dress rehearsal. Let me see, let me try to get through this before taking one final break before doing some questions. All right. Let me stop sharing this. Okay. If the COVID-19 virus stays the course, millions around the world are expected to die in the COVID-19 pandemic. In the United States, a best guess estimate presented at the American Hospital Association was about 500,000 Americans dead. Now, with sufficient social distancing, that may be reduced to under 100,000. That's the latest estimates, which take into account the fact that we're now doing some social distancing. But even at 500,000 deaths, it's still unbelievably could be much, much worse. With thousands already dead and millions projected to perish, billions in lockdown and trillions lost as markets tumble, COVID-19 still is only shaping up to be a Category 2 or Category 3 pandemic. Let me show you what the CDC came up with. Here we go. All right, CDC. Okay, this is This is the pandemic planning guidelines from the Centers for Disease Control. And if you go down to page 34 here, you will see their pandemic severity index. It's fashioned after the hurricane severity index to define the destructive capacity of a storm. Well, this is the CDC's attempt at classifying the destructive capacity of a pandemic. It's based on case fatality rate, the percentage of those who fall ill, who eventually succumb to the infection. In the 1918 pandemic, about 1 in 3 became infected, and of those, 2%, about 2% died. So that made the 1918 pandemic a category 5. See, case fatality ratio, 2% or more, that is a category 5 pandemic. So that's kind of analogous to a super typhoon with sustained winds exceeding 150 miles an hour, right? That would be a category 5 hurricane, right? Now, the rate of those dying from COVID-19 is much lower, probably around 0.5%, meaning 1 in 200 cases dying. That's based both on where the most extensive testing has been done, like on that cruise ship, Diamond Princess in South Korea, as well as historical trends trying to capture some estimates in real time. So as you can see, 2% case fatality rate like the 1918 pandemic, that's just where category 5s start. That's the minimum. The COVID-19 pandemic answers the question, wait, what would happen if SARS all of a sudden became contagious before symptoms started to rise and we couldn't stop it before coming worldwide? Well, yeah, SARS was rapidly stamped out by fever monitoring at airports, but by the time it was over, there was about 800 deaths out of about 8,000 cases. That's a case fatality ratio of 10%, right? That's 5 times worse than the 1918 pandemic in terms of the lethality. But it was only able to get to 8,000 people before we were able to stamp it out, right? Even more lethal, the MERS coronavirus killed about 850 out of 2,500. That's 34%, a 1 in 3 chance of dying if you get it. Right? Since 2002 with SARS and 2012 with MERS, we learned that coronaviruses could become deadly. Right? We had no idea. We thought they were just common cold viruses until then. Okay, now we know, oh my God, they can get deadly. Now with COVID-19, we realized, wait a second, coronaviruses don't just cause epidemics, but can explode into global pandemics, right? So coronaviruses have already told us they can do both things. They can become lethal and they can cause pandemics, right? And so it's not hard to imagine a combination of transmissibility and lethality that could make the next coronavirus pandemic an order of magnitude worse, right? Remember, SARS was 10% fatality, not 0.5%. But there's an even greater cautionary tale to be told, which is what's going to be the main subject of my upcoming book. Like, look, we've long known about the pandemic potential of the flu virus, but the deadliest it ever appeared to get was 2% fatality in the 1918 pandemic. Well, in 1997, a flu virus was discovered in chickens called H5N1 that appeared to kill more than 50% of the people infected. Like, what if a virus like that triggered a pandemic? What if instead of a 2% death rate, it was more like flip of a coin, right? The COVID-19 pandemic is devastating, but food is still being restocked in the grocery stores. The internet may be slow, but it's still up. The lights are still on and safe drinking water is still flowing out of the tap, right? If the predictions are correct and only 100,000 Americans die, that's less than 1 in 3,000 Americans dying, right? The pandemic of 1918, which 2% of the cases succumbed, 1 in 150 Americans died. Imagine if it were 10 times as bad as 2%, like 1 in 15 dying, or 25 times as bad, killing 1 in 6 of us, right? The good news is there's something we can do about it. Just as eliminating the exotic animal trade and live animal markets may go a long way towards preventing the next coronavirus pandemic, reforming the way we raise domestic animals for food may help forestall the next killer flu. The last pandemic, we got off easy. The swine flu only triggered a Category 1 pandemic in 2009, but it showed a new origin point for pandemic viruses, industrial pork production. The emergence of H5N1 and 10 other new bird flu viruses infecting humans have been blamed on industrial poultry production. And as part of the packet of materials you'll receive from this webinar recording will be an invited review I wrote for Critical Reviews in Microbiology, where I lay out all the evidence. So I don't want to just say, oh, it's pork production, it's poultry production. You can read all the science that supports it. And of course, I'll have videos coming out about it. Currently, the CDC considers the bird flu virus H7N9 to be our gravest pandemic threat for the next pandemic. Let me show you where they tally up those scores. I'll put it, paste it into the chat box. In fact, here's the site. We can go to it really quickly. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is the CDC influenza pandemic risk assessment. As you can see, the H7N9 strain from Hong Kong now has the highest potential emergence risk and the highest potential impact risk of all the new viral strains that are out there. And in fact, if you, there was actually a risk assessment done an estimate was published as to what an H7N9 pandemic would look like in the United States, and they concluded, you have to kind of do the math here, but they concluded that it would result in millions of Americans dying. So far, H7N9 has killed about 600 of the first 1,500 people it infected. So that's like 40%, 2 in 5 people died. Thankfully, neither H5N1 nor H7N9 have acquired the capacity for even easy human-to-human transmission, but they're still out there, still mutating. You know, pandemics are always a matter of when, not if. And, you know, a pandemic with more than just a few percent mortality wouldn't just threaten financial markets, but civilization itself as we know it. How can we stop the emergence of pandemic viruses in the first place? Now, if there's one concept to draw upon from all my work on preventing or reversing chronic disease, right, it's whenever possible, you treat the cause, right? Okay, and that's the final bit that I'm going to talk about, what we can do to prevent the next. Then I'll take some questions after this break. I know we're going long. I appreciate everyone sticking with me. I'm going to switch over. We're going to take another 5 minutes. Let us go get some hydration. Okay, and we are back. All right. It sounds like my vocal cords are still holding up. I'm not used to talking this long. Usually webinars, right? We have all those videos interspersing, but so far so good. All right, so we were just talking about how to stop the potential for a pandemic, a future pandemic that could be many times worse than what we have now. And the answer may be on what we eat. The American Public Health Association, the largest and oldest association of public health professionals in the world, has called for a moratorium on industrial farm animal production, so-called factory farming, for nearly 2 decades now. Now, let me share with you this editorial in the Journal of the American Public Health Association. Again, the most prestigious association of public health professionals in the world. I'm actually going to be including this in the webinar packet that I send you along with the recording. As you can see, it's entitled "The Chickens Come Home to Roost." And it went beyond just calling for a de-intensification of pork and poultry production, an end to pig and chicken factories. The editorial questioned the prudence of raising so many animals for food in the first place, given the pandemic threat they may pose. And let me read you a little passage here, which I'm going to highlight here. In fact, we can make it up a little bigger. It is curious, therefore, given the pandemic threat, that changing the way humans treat animals, most basically ceasing to eat them, or at the very least radically limiting the quantity of them that are eaten, is largely off the radar as a significant preventive measure. But such a change, sufficiently adopted or imposed, could still reduce the chances of the much feared influenza pandemic. It would even be more likely to prevent unknown future diseases that, in the absence of the change, may result from farming animals intensively and killing them for food. Yet humanity does not appear to consider this option. However, thanks to food innovations, this may be changing. Have you looked in the dairy case at supermarkets lately, right? Some of America's largest dairy producers have recently filed for bankruptcy due to the constellation of new consumer choices in the dairy case. I don't know if, I don't think most people know this, but I was peripherally involved in the largest meat recall in human history. Remember the footage of those cows getting forklifted, right? A hidden camera investigation at a California slaughter plant for spent dairy cows led to the recall of nearly 150 million pounds of beef for violations of food safety rules meant to protect the public from mad cow disease. Downed dairy cows, too sick to even walk, were being dragged to slaughter with chains into the federal school lunch program, right? But you don't have to worry about contaminated cow brains in your oat milk, right? See, plant-based milks are a no-brainer. Anyway, but do you see what I'm saying, right? Yes, you can pass, public health regulations to stop the cannibalistic feeding practices of feeding slaughterhouse waste to dairy cows, or you can just provide the public with better alternatives and let the market eliminate the risk entirely because there's no prions in plants. Prions are the infectious particles in mad cow disease, right? HIV/AIDS came from people slaughtering primates. 30 million people wouldn't be dead right now if they were eating meals from bushes instead of bushmeat. You can't get coronaviruses from cauliflower. There's no flu in falafel production, right? No matter how tightly you crowd the balls together, still not a problem. What I am saying is that our food choices don't just affect our personal health, but our global health, right? Not just in terms of climate change, but in terms of pandemic risk. Thankfully, expanded options are now hitting the meat case as well. No longer a niche market for vegetarians, major meat producers have started blending in vegetable proteins to make hybrid meat products. Like Tyson has these sausage links, these whole blend sausage links, which include plant protein. Purdue's so-called next generation chicken nuggets, right? Smithfield, the largest pork producer on planet Earth, recently debuted an entire line of plant-based products, right? How many fewer curly-tailed viral mixing vessels are there now that, Dunkin' Donuts has a meat-free breakfast sausage? How many fewer hens are packed beak to beak in cages now that the, egg-free mayo has taken the sandwich spread sector by storm, right? Corn, a brand of meat-free meat, plant-based meat, well, made from the mushroom kingdom, opened a single facility that can produce the meat equivalent of 20 million chickens every year, right? Now, these products may not be the healthiest from a personal standpoint, right? Processed, added sodium, but from a pandemic standpoint, zero risk, right? A perfect case in point, if you really want to take it far, is an even more innovative approach to pandemic prevention suggested by Winston Churchill in 1932. Check it out. Where are we? Here we go. Here we go. This is in an essay he wrote in the 1932 issue of Popular Mechanics called 50 Years Hence. And he predicted that in 50 years hence, let me blow that up a little bit, in 50 years hence, we shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat the breast or wing by growing these parts separately under a suitable media, right? Indeed, in terms of efficiency, growing meat straight from muscle cells rather than animals could reduce greenhouse gas emissions and water use by up to 96%, lower land use by up to 99%. But when you factor in pandemic risk, the benefits to human health could arguably rival those to planetary health. The primary human health benefit of a slaughter-free harvest would be food safety, right? There's been a six-fold increase in food poisoning cases in the last few decades, sickening tens of millions of Americans every year, and contaminated meats and animal products, #1 cause, right? So when the cultivated meat industry calls this product clean meat, it's not just a nod to clean energy, right? Food poisoning pathogens, E. coli, Campylobacter, Salmonella, are due to fecal residue, fecal contamination found in most poultry samples of the United States, and about half of retail ground beef and pork chops, right? But you don't have to cook the crap out of the meat if there's no crap to begin with. These are intestinal bugs, so you don't have to worry about them if you're producing meat without intestines, just like you don't have to worry about brewing up new respiratory viruses if you're producing meat without the lungs. Again, not the best choice for personal health, right? But this is a way people could have their meat and eat it too without exposing humanity to catastrophic pandemic risk. We may be one bush meat meal away from the next HIV, one pangolin plate away from the next deadly coronavirus, and one factory farm away from the next killer flu. Tragically, it may take a pandemic with a virus like H5N1 before the world realizes the true cost of cheap chicken. Whew, all right, there's some food for thought for everybody, right? It will be all fleshed out, no pun intended, in my new upcoming book on the subject, with my book tour for How Not to Diet on hiatus. I only got to about 40 cities out of the 200 city book tour. Time has opened up for me to do this. Are you all ready to see the cover, which just came out yesterday? We just decided on the title yesterday. Are you ready for the cover? Here we go. Dun, dun, dun. You're the first to see it, nobody. So we just got it yesterday. Here we go. Dun, 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 dun. There it is. When is this book coming out? Unbelievably, the book will be out next month. May 26th is expected launch date. but only on ebook and audiobook because they just couldn't print them up that quickly. Now in the fall, they'll actually be physical books, regular books. But right now, it'll be on ebook, and I found a recording studio where I could socially distance and record the whole thing on audio. So you'll be able to listen to the whole thing as well. Of course, that's only if I can finish it in time. Which is what I'm going to go straight back to right after answering some of your questions. So let's do that right now and start going through some of your questions. Again, next week, 2 full hours of just Q&A, period. All questions all the time. The next week, another hour of Q&A. And then probably next month, we'll do a whole nother webinar with all the updates. All right. But okay, let me get to your questions. So all this time, we've had this amazing team of Nutrition Facts staff compiling all the questions, realizing that a lot of people have the same questions. So instead of asking, so they just, all put it in one question. So anyway, okay. Questions. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. This is, I went to the question list, and it was from the last pandemic. I mean, excuse me, the last pandemic, the last webinar. Let me see where it is. See a few questions. Okay. All right. Sorry. Today's questions. Okay. First question. Do we need to disinfect peeled raw fruits or vegetables? How long does the virus live on raw fruits and vegetables? Is it necessary to peel fruits, for example, apples? Should we avoid raw foods? Can we contract the virus by eating contaminated food? Does cooking or freezing kill the virus? Oh, okay. Great questions. Okay. Of course, the fruits and vegetables or any food serves absolutely no risk if it hasn't been contaminated with the virus. But so let's say you get some takeout or something, and it comes from somebody you have no idea the disease status of the person that just handed it to you. Obviously, if they were sick, they shouldn't be working. But again, you're infectious before you're sick, spewing virus everywhere. So maybe the takeout container you just got is covered with virus. And you say, well, no problem, because the virus doesn't last long on paper. But yeah, it lasts hours. And so if someone just was touching, had snot on they coughed in their hands and then touched a bag and then passed the bag or left the bag right on your doorstep, so you don't even see the person, and you pick up the bag, you now have potentially contaminated hands. And so it's critically important that you wash your hands after touching anything that comes to your house, because it could potentially have virus on it. But the virus is easily destroyed by heat. It comes out to be about 160 degrees Fahrenheit kills the virus, which is like that's basically like hot tea, right? I mean, that's so if you microwave your the takeout or whatever, and you get up to that cooking temperature, you kill off any virus that's in it. But in terms of let's say you got grocery delivery and you got some apples, there could be virus on the outside of the apples just because someone who was touching them. And so now there's something called an infectious dose. Just because there's virus doesn't mean there's enough virus to actually cause infection. We don't know what the infectious dose is, so we want to err on the side of caution. And that means disinfecting your produce when it comes into your house. And so how do you do that? Sudsy soap and water. You can have, have your sink with sudsy water, and you can dump your apples, your produce in there, and then you can, wash them off, and then rinse all the detergent off, and then you have clean vegetables. And so you can eat your raw fruits and vegetables. And of course, you want to particularly eat healthy during times like this. And so you can do that, but it's in that first part where you're receiving something in your house. And if someone was just affected, someone who was infected just before it got to you could potentially have virus on it. So you just need to be very careful in terms of washing your hands. So it's just like touching a public surface. If you were outside, you touched a handrail, you touched an elevator button, you would want to wash your hands before you touch your face. Well, the same thing, that public service just came into your house. That apple just came into your house. That's a public service because someone was just touching it. That wasn't in your household. And so you treat it like a public service. And so you get rid of all the, you disinfect it and disinfect anything that touched it, like your hands, before touching your mucous membranes, before touching your face. Okay. Now, there's never been a single reported case of transmission so far. I mean, you'd think if this was happening, people were getting infected by apples, there would actually be cases. Someone would be like, well, wait a second, I have been completely socially isolated for 14 days, not a single visit with anybody, and I got infected. And the only way that could have happened is through grocery delivery for takeout that came into the house. There has not yet been a single case like that. So that should make us feel good that we shouldn't be obsessing about it, but err on the side of caution. Most people have a lot of time on their hands anyway. Wash your produce. Okay. Next thing, what's the best thing we can do to boost our immune function to help avoid getting seriously sick, and what daily supplements should we take for immune function? Okay. Maybe the person that asked that, the person probably asked that question before I actually got to that section where I talked about, so yes, there are specific foods. I have 100 videos, specific foods, specific supplements, specific herbs that boost different parts of your immune system, natural killer cell activity, antibody production, all sorts of things. But we don't know if that's good or bad, right? Right? I had the whole section talking about it's not necessarily a good thing because some of the severity of COVID-19, some of the lung damage, some of the death is not from the virus, but the collateral damage caused by our immune system killing off the virus. And so do we want a stronger immune system? Well, in general, yes, but elevating specific arms of the immune system may not be a good idea. And until we know what part of the immune system we want and what part of the immune system is overreacting and causing this kind of autoimmune reaction that's killing people, we don't want to be just willy-nilly be like, yeah, take elderberry, it works against the flu. Well, this is not the flu. We don't know enough about this virus. So just take good care of yourself and don't go out of your way to start anything new because we don't know if it's going to be good for you or bad for you. Okay. What about using white vinegar, hydrogen peroxide, or isopropyl alcohol to disinfect? Again, and is there essential oil cleaning solutions for surfaces like tea tree, clove, oregano, lemon, or orange? Okay, again, this question probably came in before I talked about all this stuff. I talked about there is some vinegar data. I believe that was for SARS. Certainly isopropyl alcohol, we know. We don't have any hydrogen peroxide data or regular hydrogen peroxide data. But we know a 30% isopropyl alcohol can kill it in 30 seconds. And in terms of essential oils, the only one that's been tested, and again, this was not against the COVID-19 virus, was pine sol. And the active ingredient is actually, I believe, is this pinene, is this, kind of a tree wood essential oil, which has antimicrobial properties. But again, I believe that was just SARS virus, wasn't tested against COVID-19. SARS virus, or maybe the common cold viruses, coronaviruses, or maybe it was that murine hepatitis virus. You'd have to rewind the recording of the webinar to check that out. Can drinking hot beverages such as tea kill off any viruses or bacteria lingering in your throat or nasal passages? And is there some tea better than others? Yeah, probably not. I mean, because you'd have to be kind of scalding temperature. Because instantly when you drink tea, it instantly comes down, not instantly, but comes rapidly down to body temperature, right? And so that's why, you sip tea and it's really hot at your lips. By the time it gets in the back of your mouth, it's warm, it cools down. And so, yeah, probably the temperature at which in the back of your throat, it would have to be hot, would be kind of too scalding to your lips. So yeah, I would not recommend it. But of course, hibiscus green tea, super helpful in other ways, like hibiscus tea, for example, brings down your blood pressure. And that's we do not want to have high blood pressure during these times. Okay. What other questions? How much time we have? All right. Well, we have as much time as we want. We're already like an hour and a half over schedule, and I apologize for that. Let me take a few more. And again, hours of Q&A next week, another hour the next week. Okay. Is it possible that the vaccine will have side effects? Do the benefits outweigh the drawbacks? Will the safety testing over the longer term? Will getting inoculated directly through the bloodstream be an efficient way because it's less dangerous than getting inoculated through the lungs or airways of getting antibodies? Oh yeah, some suggesting human challenge trials would be helpful in developing a vaccine. What risks should people consider if they're thinking about volunteering? Wow, these are really good questions. Why does it and why does it take so long to develop a vaccine? Okay, yeah, so there's some good kind of vaccine questions. Okay, so we have never had a coronavirus vaccine ever in history. So it takes 6 to 8 months just to make a new flu. So if there was a new pandemic flu, it takes 6 to 8 months to make a flu vaccine to that specific virus. And we make different flu vaccines every single year. We are like, that's the one vaccine we probably know better than any other vaccine, and it still takes 6 to 8 months. Why? And so we've never made a coronavirus. That makes it even more. And in fact, there was a coronavirus, lots of research into the SARS coronavirus, lots of vaccine research poured in. And then once the SARS virus epidemic was squashed down, it all evaporated. So there was some really good research, and had money continued to flow, thinking, hey, there may be another SARS someday, we would be much better stationed to know what it's even like to make a SARS coronavirus vaccine or any kind of coronavirus vaccine. Do you do it to the spike proteins? What's the best way to make a vaccine? How do you avoid the antibody-dependent enhancement where SARS vaccinated monkeys actually had more lung damage than unvaccinated monkeys? So that's why it takes a long time. So the answer is, how long does it take to vaccine? We can have a vaccine tomorrow. The question is not how long does it take a vaccine, it's how long do you get a safe and effective vaccine? A vaccine in terms of efficacy and safety that doesn't make it worse, that doesn't cause side effects. Let's say a vaccine causes horrible side effects in 1 in 1,000 people. Well, you may not even see that if you only tested on 100 people, right? So because you're potentially vaccinating billions of people, you have to look for extremely rare side effects. How do you do that? By testing it on thousands and thousands of people. That takes a lot of time, right? We have to make sure, and we have to see if it even works. How do you do that? What you do is you vaccinate half the people with a new, and you don't vaccinate the other half, and then you wait for a month and you see who gets the disease. It's kind of a long way to wait. And people are social distancing, so only a few hopefully are going to get infected anyway. And so then you need really large numbers to see, does the vaccine even work? That's why, as this questioner suggested, humans challenge trials. We can make it go quicker if we gave people COVID, we vaccinate half people, vaccinate and unvaccinate the other half, and then we challenge them. We actually give them the virus. You vaccinate them with the experimental vaccine, and then you intentionally expose them to the COVID-19 virus and see if they're protected, see if they get sick or not. And now that sounds horrible, right? But there's ways you can make it safer. You give them just a little dose. Maybe you could give them a virus that's been knocked down a little bit, somehow inactivated a little bit, so it's not going to be really dangerous, potentially. You give it a really young, healthy person. Okay, so that's the kind of ethics questions that are dealing with now. It could potentially accelerate the production of a vaccine, but again, we're talking 12 to 18 months, best case scenario, because we've never made a coronavirus vaccine. We don't even know if it's possible to make a coronavirus vaccine that actually safe and effective. We may never have one. Best case scenario, 12 to 18 months. And so that's why it's so important not to get infected in the first place. Let's just get some idea about vaccination. Okay. Next question. What should we do when we get home from being out shopping or at work? Should we remove and wash clothes? What should families of healthcare workers do when their family members come home from working at the hospitals? It is a good idea to have fresh clothes. You should presume that being in a highly contaminated setting like a healthcare setting, dealing with patients, that you are covered in head to toe with virus. Remember, it's in the air. And so it could potentially get all over. And so that's why there should be clean clothes at the door. So you shouldn't be coming into the house without switching out. We need like a vestibule, you know, like those biosecurity labs where you come into like a, you know, a little chamber and then with airlocks and everything. That'd be ideal. But yeah, we don't want people tramping the virus into the house on shoes, on clothing. We should disinfect and clean, you know, straight to the shower. You put booties on, fresh new booties on, go into the shower so you don't infect anything on the way. You don't want to bring virus home to infect your family. And if you have really vulnerable people at home, maybe you don't want to even go home at all, and go and stay someplace else, because the risk of bringing home this virus is significant. Okay, what is my assessment of hydroxychloroquine as a prevention and or treatment? This is this malaria drug, really remarkable history about this malaria drug. I'll spare you the details. I think I actually have a video about it where I talk about it. But it has, I don't know, really remarkable. But so there's been uncontrolled trials, small uncontrolled trials that suggestive that there could be benefit, but we won't know until we have large randomized trials. Those are we're happening right now. We will know very soon if it's going to work or not. It may very well, it may not. And hopefully it will. They're not benign drugs. There's no such thing as a benign drug, except a placebo maybe. And so we obviously, the benefits have to outweigh the risks. We do not yet know what the benefits are. We do know what the risks are. It would be fantastic if it was effective, because it's a super cheap drug produced in huge quantities and available in the global south, in lower income countries where they need it the most. And we will find out soon whether or not that will help. Right now, the really only kind of specialized treatment is this convalescent plasma, basically getting a blood transfusion or blood products, trying to get antibodies. The plasma, the liquid part, the non-cellular part of blood from someone who recovered, in hopes that you get some of their antibody protection. Again, small trials, suggestive of benefit. Again, we are not sure, and that again carries risk. Okay, I keep hearing that 5G is, whoa, that just jumped down. I keep hearing that 5G is weakening the terrain of humans, making them more susceptible to the virus. That sounds like internet hooey to me, but it's not something I've looked at in particular. But my gut reaction is that sounds not worth worrying about. Is there any evidence that plant-based diets help people survive? Oh, the 1918 pandemic. Any evidence that those diets are helping now? Are vegans and whole food plant-based folks faring better than others when they get the virus? Can whole food plant-based diet offer protection from the lungs from COVID-19 via the microbiome, right? We, although studies have not been done, and I don't know of any 1918 diet studies, we do know that we would, and there hasn't been studies done now during COVID-19, but I would bet my bottom dollar that we would see protection. Why? Because of those comorbidities. What is increasing risk of death? Let's go through them again. Heart disease, boom. Preventable, arrestable, reversible with a plant-based diet. Hypertension, high blood pressure, preventable, arrestable, reversible with a healthy enough plant-based diet. Type 2 diabetes, preventable, arrestable, reversible with a healthy enough plant-based diet. Obesity, again, can be reversed, right? And so people who are eating healthy plant-based diets significantly lower rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, all these comorbidities. And so we would expect them to fare much better during this and other similar pandemics. But again, we have yet to have data. Okay, next question. What explains the disproportionate rise of infections and death among the African-American population? And how can we reduce that impact? I presume it's higher rates of hypertension, higher rates of these comorbidities. So African Americans tend to have higher rates of most of our chronic diseases. If you look at, for example, the prostate cancer risk, why do African American men have such higher rates of prostate cancer? Is they actually have worse diets. And so it turns out it's not some genetic thing. It's actually because they're eating worse diets, they're higher smoking rates, higher these contributing risk factors, as well as disproportionately have less access to healthcare, et cetera, which is more of a socioeconomic class thing than a race thing. So how can we get everyone to eat healthier? We can tell them, we can share this amazing data by wonderful books, websites, documentaries on eating and living healthier to prevent the leading killers. Right now, I believe COVID-19 is the #3 killer in the United States. But remember, #1, still heart disease, something we can do something about. And of course, this is not the time to have a heart attack when you cannot, when your local hospital may potentially be overwhelmed. All right, do I expect to see a shift in diets? Environmental awareness and dietary recommendations from big agencies and organizations like the WHO after the pandemic. Well, look, the WHO already recommends a plant-based diet. So if you go to the World Health Organization COVID-19 page and it says, what can I do? It says eat healthy. And how does it define healthy? A diet that's centered around whole plant foods. I mean, this is what the science shows. There's been and there's also benefits in terms of climate change and other environmental aspects. What do I think this pandemic will do? Well, again, hope that the silver lining here is that we're going to start thinking about pandemic prevention. We're going to think about what we can do to lower our risk. You know, when so many of us have been talking about this for years and years, but no one listens just because, you know, we don't tend to shore up the levees until after they break, until after the storm. But we've got a storm, and hopefully people will pay better attention, and we can staunch some coming pandemics. I will certainly trying to do my part. Okay, I have a note from my staff. You can also tell people that we will email out the live Q&A info for the 16th when we send the follow-up email, and to check our social media in the next few days to the exact dates and links. Okay, so that's great information. So here I am talking about, I'm gonna be doing these hours of Q&As next week. Exactly when? Well, we're gonna email you. We have your email, because you registered for the webinar. We will send you that information. Let me take one final question for us to end today. And again, hours of Q&A coming up in the next few weeks. And apologize this went so long. Final question, how do I maintain a positive outlook when, despite the scientific knowledge that's out there, most people seem intent to ignore despite the existential dangers? Well, how do I maintain the positive outlook? That's the silver lining, right? I mean, that's finally people are going to wake up and say, you know, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. It's not enough often to appeal to people's conscience, for example. So, you know, I can talk. Let me go back to that meat recall. These down animals, these dairy cows, too sick or injured to even walk, dragged to slaughter. So animal protection groups have been tried to ban the sale of these downed animals, to ban the treatment of downed animals. Like if you have a animal that's too sick to even stand up and it's not going to get better, you can't drag them to slaughter. You say, wait a second, why don't you just kill them and then slaughter them? You can't. It's actually illegal to slaughter dead animals. Meaning you can't just like take roadkill, take it to the slaughterhouse and pack it up. You have to actually kill them in the slaughterhouse, like, you know, because like a USDA approval process. Okay, so they have to be breathing when you slaughter them. So that's why they drag these animals. And so these animal welfare groups are like, well, that's cruel to drag them to slaughter. You should just euthanize them if they're not going to get better at the farm, then not travel them you know, they have to be chained onto, forklifted onto the truck, then all the way to the slaughterhouse. It's just cruel. Okay. I mean, I remember, I mean, it's probably decades ago where groups were asking for this. And there was actually a Down Animal Protection Act that was introduced into Congress year after year, and nothing, absolutely nothing. Who cares about cows, right? They're just cows, right? No movement, no political movement whatsoever. And then, boom, mad cow disease. And all of a sudden, downed animals, because that sign of bovine spongiform encephalopathy and mad cow disease could be downer status. Maybe the animal's down because they broke their leg, yes. But they could be down because they can't walk, because they have a neurological condition that can be passed along to people. And it's the kind of thing that can't be cooked out of the meat. And so all of a sudden there was a public health. So all of a sudden there was a selfish motivation to stop treating animals this way. And all of a sudden, boom, Down Animal Protection passed, Protection Act passed. It's illegal to drag animals to slaughter anymore. We'd like to think it was the angels of their better nature that they finally woke up and said, well, this isn't very nice. No, it was selfish, but look, the animal doesn't care why we do it. The public health, the selfish human health aspects were what really kind of took it over the finish line. And so I see the same thing with like these live animal wet marks. There are animal welfare groups, environmental groups in China, in South Asia, who have been saying it's cruel to keep all these animals crowded together, to transport them these long distances, just to keep them alive. And people are like, yeah. You know, they're like, well, yeah, but people are going to buy them. There's money to be made. But all of a sudden, what someone eats in a wet market has potential global health implications. It's not just a personal decision. It's all of a sudden, it could potentially affect all of us. And under these circumstances, maybe live animal markets are going to be shut down. Maybe the exotic animal trade will be shut down because of this. And maybe we're going to accelerate the innovations in the kind of alternative protein space to see all sorts of things. Now, all of a sudden, right, we can make, angel food cake with aquafaba, which with whipped chickpea juice. Who knew that? You used to have to use eggs. You used to have chickens to make eggs to make your angel food cake. Now we can make angel food cake with chickpea juice. Not saying angel food cake is good for you, but I'm saying, there's innovative ways we can not expose ourselves to risks. And now that we do know how great the risks are, maybe there's going to be changes. So along with human culpability comes hope. If changes in human behavior can cause new epidemic disease, well, maybe changes in human behavior may prevent them in the future. That is certainly my hope. And before I end, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the first responders and frontline medical workers, many of whom are not just dealing with physical and mental exhaustion, the torment of difficult triage decisions, and losing patients and colleagues. They're putting their own lives at risk. Thousands of healthcare workers have already been infected. There's been more than 100 that have died so far. Crises like this, yes, they can bring out the worst in people. There's been a big rise in harassment and hate crimes against Asian Americans, for example, but it can also bring out the best. And you can support those on the front line from being overwhelmed by staying safe, and if you can, staying home. Thank you very much, everyone.